Outside a small-town diner, a bully laughs in a single mom's face right in front of her child. He says she's nothing. But then, the truth drops. She's a veteran, a hero. And the room goes silent. Hope rises until lies spread. Flyers, whispers, broken glass, at midnight. The bully comes back, torn up by a loss he won't face. He tries to make it right, then does something that could wreck her life all over again. Faith meets fury. A mother fights for her name, her child, and the broken who served. Can courage and one act of grace save a bully and a town before hate wins? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The early morning sunlight streamed through the windows of Mabel's diner, casting warm golden rectangles across the worn linoleum floor. Rachel Turner smoothed her hands over her fresh apron, breathing in the familiar scent of coffee and bacon that filled the air. The quiet hum of conversation and clinking silverware created a comforting melody she'd grown to love over the past year. "Morning, Mrs. Turner," called Mr. Peterson from his usual corner booth. The elderly man raised his empty coffee cup with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Coming right up," Rachel replied, grabbing the coffee pot. Her shoes squeaked softly against the floor as she made her rounds, topping off cups and exchanging gentle greetings with the regulars who'd become like family. At the counter, Eli hunched over his sketchbook, his pencil moving quickly across the paper. His backpack lay propped against the stool beside him, ready for school. Rachel's heart swelled as she watched him work, his face scrunched in concentration. He had his father's artistic talent. There was no doubt about that. "What are you drawing today, sweetheart?" She leaned over his shoulder, careful not to spill the coffee pot. Eli tilted the sketchbook so she could see better. "It's a soldier, Mom. See? He's protecting his friends." The detailed drawing showed a figure in combat gear, shield raised high. Rachel's throat tightened. "It's beautiful, honey." She ran her free hand through his hair, remembering how his father used to do the same thing. "Order up." Mabel's voice boomed from the kitchen window. "Rachel, honey, grab that plate of pancakes for table 6, would you?" "On it," Rachel called back, giving Eli's shoulder a quick squeeze before heading to the kitchen window. The morning rush was picking up, with more customers filing in for their breakfast fix. Rachel moved efficiently between tables, jotting down orders and delivering plates steaming with eggs, bacon, and Mabel's famous home fries. "These hash browns are perfect today, Rachel," Mrs. Martinez said from her window seat. "Tell Mabel she's outdone herself." Rachel smiled. "I will. Can I get you anything else?" The bell above the door chimed as a young couple walked in, looking around uncertainly. Rachel guided them to an empty booth, handing them menus with a warm welcome. Back at the counter, Eli was packing up his sketchbook. "Bus will be here soon, Mom. Did you eat enough?" Rachel asked, noting his half-finished toast. "I'm good." He stood up, shouldering his backpack. "Promise." Rachel pulled him into a quick hug, breathing in the familiar scent of his shampoo. "Have a great day at school. Remember, Mrs. Wilson is picking you up for study group this afternoon." "I know, Mom." He rolled his eyes good-naturedly, but hugged her back tight. As Eli headed for the door, Mabel emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Her gray hair was escaping from its neat bun, and her round face was flushed from the heat of the stove. "That boy of yours is growing like a weed," Mabel commented, watching Eli leave. "Seems like yesterday he could barely see over the counter." Rachel nodded, feeling the familiar mix of pride and melancholy. Time flies. "Speaking of time," Mabel said, "could you help me inventory the stockroom during the mid-morning lull? Been putting it off all week." "Of course," Rachel replied, grateful as always for Mabel's motherly presence. The older woman had given her this job when she'd needed it most, never questioning her ability to learn the ropes quickly. The morning continued its steady rhythm. Rachel refilled salt shakers, wiped down tables, and chatted with customers. She loved how the diner seemed to hold the whole town's stories within its walls. Every booth had heard confessions of love, business deals, family celebrations, and quiet griefs. Around 10, during a brief quiet spell, Rachel started gathering dirty dishes from an empty booth. The weight of the plates felt good in her hands, solid and real. Through the window, she could see Main Street coming to life, shop owners unlocking their doors and early birds window shopping. A burst of harsh laughter cut through the peaceful moment. Rachel's hands tightened on the plates as she recognized the sound. Looking up, she saw Derek Cole and his friends standing on the sidewalk outside the diner. They were facing the window, and even though Rachel couldn't make out their words, she could see Derek's familiar smirk. The plates suddenly felt heavier in her hands as she stood there, caught between the warmth of the diner and the chill that Derek's presence always brought. She drew in a deep breath, reminding herself of all she'd survived, of all she'd built here, in this small town that had become home. Some of the regulars had noticed Derek too. Mr. Peterson's newspaper lowered slightly, his eyes narrowing as he watched the group outside. At the counter, Mrs. Tuhive Martinez straightened in her seat, her coffee cup pausing halfway to her lips. "Rachel?" Mabel's voice came from behind her. "You okay there, honey?" Rachel adjusted her grip on the plates, squared her shoulders, and turned toward the kitchen. "I'm fine, Mabel, just fine." Rachel pushed open the diner's back door, stepping into the bright sunlight of her afternoon break. The warmth felt good on her tired shoulders after hours of carrying heavy plates. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath of fresh air that didn't smell of grease and coffee. "Well, look who it is, the struggling single mom trying to make it on tips." Derek Cole's mocking voice cut through her moment of peace. Rachel's eyes snapped open. Derek stood with 3 of his friends near the dumpster, all of them wearing identical smirks. Her stomach tightened, but she kept her face neutral, determined not to let them see how their presence affected her. "Afternoon, Derek," she said evenly, starting to walk past them toward the small bench where she usually ate her lunch. Derek stepped into her path, his broad frame blocking the way. At 48, he still carried himself like the high school football star he'd once been, though his Letterman glory days were long past. "Must be real proud of yourself, serving burgers and scraping by. That what you dreamed of growing up?" His friends chuckled, and Rachel felt heat rise to her cheeks. She clutched her brown paper lunch bag tighter, its contents suddenly seeming meager and pathetic. "I'm proud to work hard and support my son," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "Now, if you'll excuse me—" "Support?" Derek barked out a harsh laugh. "Is that what you call it? Boy needs a father figure, not some waitress mama working double shifts just to keep the lights on." The words stung more than Rachel wanted to admit. She thought of Eli inside, probably watching through the window while working on his latest drawing. Her son shouldn't have to see this. "My son is doing just fine," she said firmly. "Please, let me pass." Derek's friends had spread out now, forming a loose circle around her. The afternoon sun beat down, and sweat trickled down Rachel's back under her uniform. "Doing fine?" Derek sneered. "That what you tell yourself? No dad, mom barely making minimum wage. Yeah, real fine situation you've got there." Rachel's jaw tightened. She could feel other people stopping to watch now, customers heading to their cars, workers from nearby shops on their own breaks. The humiliation burned in her chest. "What I do with my life isn't your concern," she said, trying to step around him. Derek moved to block her again. "See, that's where you're wrong. This town, we got standards. Working women trying to play both mom and dad, acting like they don't need a man, sets a bad example." "Back off, Derek," Rachel warned, though her voice trembled slightly. "I have to get back to work." "Back to work?" He gestured mockingly toward the diner. "You mean back to falling all over yourself trying to remember who ordered what? Back to begging for tips?" The door of the diner chimed, and Rachel's heart sank as she heard Eli's voice. "Mom?" Her 10-year-old son stood in the doorway, his beloved sketchbook clutched to his chest. Several customers had gathered behind him, watching the scene unfold. "Go back inside, honey," Rachel called, trying to keep her voice light. "I'll be right there." But Derek had already turned his attention to Eli, his smile cruel. "Hey there, kid. Just having a chat with your mama here about her career choices. Must be real proud, having a mother who serves food to her betters all day." Rachel's hands clenched into fists. She could take their mockery of her, but bringing Eli into it crossed a line. "That's enough," she said sharply. "What's wrong? Truth hurt?" Derek took a step closer, towering over her. Face it. You're just another failed single mom who couldn't keep a man around. Nothing special about that." The words hung in the air like poison. Rachel could see Eli's face crumpling, could feel the stares of the gathering crowd. Her chest ached with a mixture of rage and shame, but she forced herself to unclench her fists. Fighting back would only make things worse. Without another word, she turned and walked back toward the diner entrance, her legs shaking but her head held high. The crowd parted silently to let her pass. She placed a gentle hand on Eli's shoulder, guiding him inside with her, away from Derek's laughter and the piercing stares of onlookers. The door swung shut behind them, the bell's cheerful chime a stark contrast to the heaviness in Rachel's heart. Her hands trembled as she smoothed her apron, trying to gather herself before returning to work. Derek's heavy boots thudded against the diner's linoleum floor as he followed Rachel inside, his friends trailing behind him like a pack of wolves. The lunch crowd fell silent, forks pausing mid-bite as all eyes turned to watch the confrontation unfold. "What's the matter? Too good to talk to us now?" Derek's voice carried across the diner, dripping with mockery. Rachel kept her head high, moving behind the counter to grab her order pad. Eli sat at his usual spot, his sketchbook forgotten as he watched his mother with worried eyes. His small hands curled into fists on the counter. "I have customers to serve, Derek," Rachel said quietly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Yeah, that's right. Serve those plates. That's all you're good for anyway." Derek leaned against the counter, spreading his arms wide. Just another nobody waitress who couldn't make it anywhere else. The diner remained uncomfortably quiet. Some customers stared at their plates, while others shifted nervously in their seats. Rachel felt the weight of their stares, the heaviness of their silence. Mr. Henry Caldwell sat in his usual corner booth, his coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips. His weathered face darkened as he watched the scene unfold. The retired postal worker had been coming to the diner every day for the past year, always sitting in the same spot, always ordering the same black coffee and wheat toast. "That's enough." Mr. Henry's chair scraped against the floor as he stood up. His voice, though not loud, carried the kind of authority that made people listen. "You want to talk about nobodies, Derek Cole? Let me tell you something about Rachel Turner that might interest you." Derek turned, his lip curling. "Stay out of this, old man. Rachel here isn't just a waitress," Mr. Henry continued, walking slowly toward the counter. "She's a decorated Army veteran. Served 2 tours overseas." The diner grew even quieter, if that was possible. Rachel's face paled slightly as she gripped her order pad tighter. "Mr. Henry, please," she started, but he held up his hand. "No, Rachel. These people need to know." He turned to face the crowd. "You see that woman right there? She earned a Bronze Star for valor in combat. When her unit was ambushed, she didn't run. She led her team through enemy fire to save 3 wounded soldiers." Whispers rippled through the diner. Eli's eyes widened with pride, his chest puffing up as he looked at his mother with renewed awe. Derek's face had turned an interesting shade of red. He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "You're making that up," he finally managed. But his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "Am I?" Mr. Henry reached into his wallet and pulled out a worn newspaper clipping. "I recognized her face the first day she started working here. Kept this article all these years because it reminded me there are still real heroes in this world." He smoothed out the yellowed paper on the counter. There was Rachel, younger and in uniform, receiving her medal. The photo might have been faded, but her steady gaze and straight shoulders were unmistakable. "Mom?" Eli's voice was full of wonder. "You never told me about the newspaper." Rachel's eyes softened as she looked at her son. "There are lots of things I haven't told you about that time, honey. Some stories are hard to share." The diner had erupted into murmurs now. Regular customers who had known Rachel only as their quiet, efficient waitress were seeing her in a new light. One of the older veterans in the corner stood up and gave her a respectful nod. Derek's friends had backed away from him, looking uncomfortable. The local bully's face had turned from red to purple, his earlier bravado deflating like a punctured balloon. "Well," he sputtered, trying to save face. "War stories don't mean nothing here. This ain't Afghanistan or wherever. You're still just a..." Choose your next words very carefully, son. Mr. Henry cut in, his voice sharp as steel. You're talking to someone who's shown more courage in one day than you've shown in your entire life. The diner had gone silent again, waiting for Derek's response. He looked around at the faces staring back at him. Some angry, some disappointed, all judging. His shoulders slumped slightly. Whatever, he muttered, backing toward the door. This is stupid. Come on, guys. But his friends hesitated, casting apologetic glances at Rachel before slowly following their leader out. As the bell above the door jingled behind them, Eli jumped off his stool and ran around the counter, throwing his arms around his mother's waist. They know who you really are now, he whispered proudly, his face pressed against her apron. Rachel hugged him back, her eyes meeting Mr. Henry's over her son's head. The old man gave her a gentle smile and a slight nod before returning to his booth, leaving the newspaper clipping on the counter like a battle flag planted in victory. The regular buzz of conversation slowly returned to the diner, but it was different now. Customers smiled at Rachel with new respect as she moved between tables. Some thanked her for her service, while others simply nodded in acknowledgement. The air felt lighter, clearer, as if a long-gathering storm had finally broken. Rachel kept working, her movements as efficient as ever, but there was a new steadiness in her step. Her son watched her from his spot at the counter, beaming with pride as he returned to his sketchbook. This time, instead of his usual superhero drawings, he began sketching a figure in military uniform, standing tall and brave against the world. The afternoon sun streamed through the diner's windows, casting long shadows across the checkerboard floor. The usual clatter of plates and silverware was muted, replaced by excited whispers and meaningful glances directed at Rachel as she moved between tables. "Did you hear? A Bronze Star," one elderly woman murmured to her companion. "Saved her whole unit, I heard," another customer added in hushed tones. Rachel kept her head down, focusing on refilling coffee cups and clearing plates. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked, still shaken from the morning's confrontation with Derek. But there was something different in the air now. Respect had replaced the previous pity in people's eyes. Mabel emerged from the kitchen, her round face flushed from the heat of the grill. She caught Rachel's arm as she passed. "Come here a minute, dear." She guided Rachel to a quiet corner near the register. "I've been meaning to talk to you about something," Mabel said, her voice warm and motherly. "I need someone to help manage the evening shift. Extra hours, better pay." She squeezed Rachel's shoulder. "What you did today, standing there with such dignity while that fool Derek carried on, it showed real character." Rachel's throat tightened. "Mabel, Don't you dare try to turn this down," Mabel interrupted, wagging her finger. "You've got more grit than half this town put together. About time everyone knew it." The bell above the door chimed as more customers filed in. Rachel noticed they weren't just the usual afternoon regulars. People were coming in specifically to see her. Mr. Henry, who had revealed her military service, sat at the counter wearing a proud smile. "My coffee's getting cold, soldier," he called out with a playful wink. Rachel felt her cheeks warm as she hurried to fill his cup. "You didn't have to tell everyone, Mr. Mason." "Henry, someone needed to put Derek Cole in his place," he replied. "Besides, this town could use a reminder about what real courage looks like." Throughout the afternoon, customers left larger tips than usual, often accompanied by heartfelt thank you notes scribbled on napkins. A group of veterans who regularly gathered for coffee raised their cups to her in silent salute. When Eli arrived after school, his backpack stuffed with fresh drawings, his eyes were bright with excitement. "Mom, everyone at school was talking about you today." He pulled out his sketchbook, flipping to a new page. "Look what I drew!" Rachel leaned over the counter to see a crayon drawing of a soldier in combat gear, standing tall and proud. The figure had long brown hair like hers. "That's you, Mom," Eli beamed. "Miss Patterson asked me to tell the class about you, about how brave you are." Rachel swallowed hard, running her fingers over the childish artwork. "It's beautiful, honey." As the day wound down, Mabel insisted they head home early. "You've had quite a day," she said, pressing a paper bag of leftover pie into Rachel's hands. "Take this home for you and Eli." The drive home was quiet, with Eli occasionally humming as he added details to his drawing. Their small house welcomed them with familiar creaks and shadows. Rachel went through their evening routine, helping Eli with homework, warming up dinner, listening to him chatter about his day at school. Later, as she tucked him into bed, Eli's hand caught her sleeve. "Mom?" "Yes, sweetheart? I want to be brave like you when I grow up." His voice was soft, heavy with sleep. "Not just because of the army stuff, but because you're brave every day, even when people are mean." Rachel's heart swelled and ached at the same time. She smoothed his hair back from his forehead, remembering how his father used to do the same thing. "You're already brave, Eli. Every single day." After kissing him goodnight, Rachel walked to the living room. The triangular shadow box containing James's folded flag sat on the mantel, underneath his photograph in dress uniform. She touched the glass gently, tracing the edges of the crisp blue stars. "You'd be so proud of our boy, James," she whispered. The flag seemed to glow in the dim light, a reminder of everything she'd gained and lost. Pride and sorrow mingled in her chest as she stood there, thinking about the path that had led her from battlefield to diner counter, from soldier to single mom. The memory of James's smile in that photograph, so much like Eli's, brought both comfort and an familiar ache. Rachel stood there in the quiet living room, bathed in the soft evening light, her fingers still resting on the glass of the shadow box, surrounded by the dual weight of her past honor and present challenges. The morning air was crisp and cool as Rachel stepped out of her modest one-story house, adjusting her diner uniform. Her sensible shoes crunched on the gravel driveway as she approached her aging Honda Civic. The rising sun painted the sky in soft pinks and oranges, promising another beautiful day in their small southern town. Then she saw them. White papers fluttering under her windshield wiper like wounded birds. Rachel's steps slowed, her heart picking up an unwelcome rhythm. Something about those papers made her stomach clench. She reached for the first flyer with slightly trembling fingers. The paper was cheap, the kind you'd find in any office supply store, but the words printed on it hit like bullets. "Stolen valor? Ask yourself, where's the proof of her heroic service? Who really earned that Bronze Star?" Rachel's breath caught in her throat. She grabbed the second flyer, then the third. Each one carried similar messages, questioning her military record, suggesting she was taking credit for others' sacrifices. The accusations were carefully worded, just vague enough to avoid outright slander while planting seeds of doubt. Her military training kicked in automatically. Steady breathing, assess the situation, maintain composure. But this wasn't a battlefield. This was her home, her community, and the attack felt far more personal than any she'd faced in uniform. "Mom?" Eli's voice called from the front door. "Did you forget something?" Rachel quickly folded the papers and stuffed them into her pocket. "No, honey, just checking the car." She forced a smile, not wanting her 10-year-old to see her distress. "Got your lunch packed?" "Yeah." He held up his Batman lunchbox proudly. "Can I ride my bike to school today? Please?" "Not today, buddy." Rachel needed the normalcy of their morning drive together, needed to see him safely to school before dealing with whatever was happening. "Hop in." As they drove through familiar streets, Rachel tried to focus on Eli's chatter about his upcoming science project, but her mind kept returning to those flyers. Who had put them there? The obvious answer made her grip the steering wheel tighter. After dropping Eli off, Rachel parked in her usual spot behind Mabel's diner. She was early, as always, but today the quiet morning prep time felt ominous rather than peaceful. The back door creaked as she entered, and the kitchen's familiar sense of coffee and bacon usually brought comfort. Today, they just made her feel slightly nauseated. "Rachel?" Mabel's voice startled her. The older woman stood in the doorway between kitchen and dining room, her usually cheerful face creased with concern. "You got a minute?" Rachel nodded, untying and retying her apron strings, a nervous habit from her army days. "Of course." Mabel gestured to a quiet corner booth. The morning sun streaming through the windows couldn't warm the chill. Rachel felt as she slid into the seat. Mabel sat across from her, hands clasped on the table. "Sugar, I need to tell you something." Mabel's voice was gentle but worried. "Tom, from the hardware store, called me this morning. Said some folks are asking questions about your service record." Rachel pulled the crumpled flyers from her pocket and smoothed them on the table. "Like these?" Mabel's face darkened as she read them. "Lord have mercy. This is Derek Cole's doing, isn't it? I don't have proof, but—" "Don't need proof. Got eyes and ears, don't I?" Mabel's southern accent thickened with anger. "That man's been in every shop on Main Street, running his mouth about how convenient it was for your story to come out right when he was putting you in your place." Rachel's jaw tightened. "My place?" His words, not mine. Mabel reached across the table and squeezed Rachel's hand. "Nobody with sense believes him, honey. We all remember when you came back, how quiet you were about everything. Real heroes don't usually brag." The bell over the front door chimed, and both women looked up to see Mrs. Peterson, Rachel's next-door neighbor, hurrying in. Her face was flushed, and she made a beeline for their booth. "Rachel, I had to come tell you." Mrs. Peterson slid in beside Mabel, her voice low and urgent. "Derek Cole was at the VFW hall last night. My Herbert was there. He said Derek was telling everyone how he'd researched your service record." She made air quotes with trembling fingers. "Said he couldn't find any record of your unit being in that ambush you supposedly saved everyone from. Started suggesting maybe you'd made the whole thing up for attention." Rachel felt the blood drain from her face. The ambush. She rarely spoke about it, tried not to even think about it. The memories were still too raw. The explosion, the screams, the weight of her wounded commander as she dragged him to safety. The Bronze Star ceremony afterward had been a blur of pain medication and grief for the ones they'd lost. "He's been going around to all the veteran gatherings. Mrs. Peterson continued, twisting her hands in her lap. "Some folks are starting to wonder. Herbert told him to shut his mouth, but you know how people love gossip in this town." Rachel stood up slowly, her legs feeling wooden. "Excuse me," she managed to say, walking with measured steps to the restroom. Once inside, she gripped the sink's cold porcelain edges and stared at her reflection in the spotted mirror. The face that looked back at her was pale but composed. Her brown hair was neatly pulled back, her uniform clean and pressed. Everything in its place, just as the army had taught her. But inside, she felt like she was back in that ambush, under attack, struggling to breathe through the smoke and chaos. A soft knock at the door made her jump. "Rachel?" Mabel's voice was concerned. "You okay in there?" Rachel straightened her spine, took a deep breath. "I'm fine," she called back, the words automatic. How many times had she said those same words after returning home? After losing John? After all the nightmares and anxiety attacks she'd hidden from everyone except her therapist? She opened the door to find both Mabel and Mrs. Peterson waiting, their faces etched with worry. Mrs. Peterson clutched her purse to her chest, like armor. "There's more," her neighbor said softly. "Derek's been telling people that if you were really a hero, you wouldn't be struggling so much. Says a real veteran would have better benefits, would be able to provide more for their child." She looked down at her feet. "He's trying to make it seem like you're using a fake military story to get sympathy and tips." Rachel felt her carefully maintained composure cracking. This wasn't just an attack on her reputation, it was an assault on her honor, her service, everything she'd sacrificed for. And now, it threatened to affect Eli, to make him doubt the very things that had helped him cope with losing his father. The automatic doors of Johnson's grocery slid open with a gentle whoosh. Rachel pushed her cart inside, grateful for the cool air conditioning after the humid afternoon heat. She needed to stock up on groceries. Eli had been going through cereal like it was his job lately, and their pantry was getting bare. The familiar fluorescent lights hummed overhead as she navigated the polished floors, her shopping list clutched in one hand. The store wasn't too crowded for a Thursday afternoon, just the usual mix of after-work shoppers and young mothers with children. In the produce section, Rachel carefully selected apples, checking each one for bruises. Mrs. Martinez, who taught at Eli's school, caught her eye from across the tomato display and gave her a warm smile and a little wave. Rachel returned the gesture, feeling a small surge of gratitude for the simple kindness. But as she rounded the corner into the cereal aisle, she heard them. 2 women's voices, barely hushed, floating from behind the rows of colorful boxes. "Just doesn't add up," one voice was saying. "I mean, have you ever actually seen any proof?" "Derek said his cousin was in the army too, and he's never heard of her unit doing anything special," the other voice replied. "Makes you wonder." Rachel's hand froze halfway to reaching for Eli's favorite cereal. Her chest tightened as if someone had wrapped a belt around it and pulled. She knew they were talking about her. Their poorly concealed glances in her direction made that clear enough. She forced herself to breathe normally, to keep her movements steady as she placed the cereal in her cart. The wheels squeaked slightly as she pushed past the women, who suddenly became very interested in comparing nutrition labels. In the bread aisle, Mr. Thompson, who'd been coming to the diner for 15 years, touched her arm gently as he passed. "Don't let them get to you, Rachel," he said quietly. "Some folks just can't stand seeing others shine." Rachel managed a smile, though it felt weak on her face. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson." As she made her way through the store, she couldn't help but notice how the other shoppers seemed to fall into 2 camps. There were those like Mrs. Martinez and Mr. Thompson, who offered encouraging smiles and friendly nods. Then there were others who averted their eyes or whispered behind their hands, their doubt as visible as price tags on the shelves. At the meat counter, she overheard another snippet of conversation. "Such a shame about Rachel Turner," an elderly woman was saying to the butcher. "She always seemed like such an honest person." The butcher, Bob, who'd known Rachel for years, shook his head firmly. "She is honest, Mrs. Whitaker. I've known that woman since before her husband passed, and she's never told a lie in her life." Rachel pretended to be deeply absorbed in comparing packages of chicken, but her hands were shaking slightly. She felt like she was walking through a minefield, never knowing when another explosion of gossip might go off nearby. In the dairy section, she ran into Sarah Chen, whose daughter was in Eli's class. Sarah gave her a fierce hug right there between the yogurt and the cheese. "We're all behind you at the PTA," she whispered. "Don't you worry about a thing." By the time Rachel reached the checkout line, her nerves were frayed. Every whisper, every glance, every moment of pointed silence felt like another small cut. The cashier, a teenage girl named Jenny, who sometimes came to the diner, rang up her items with special care, making sure to meet Rachel's eyes with a kind smile. "My dad was in the army too," Jenny said softly as she bagged the groceries. "He says anyone who questions a Bronze Star recipient doesn't know the first thing about service." Rachel's throat tightened. "Thank you, Jenny. That means a lot." The drive home was a blur. Rachel's mind kept cycling through the whispers, the stares, the mix of support and suspicion. She'd faced enemy fire overseas, but somehow this felt worse. This slow erosion of her reputation, this questioning of her integrity in the very community she'd called home for so long. At home, she threw together a simple dinner of spaghetti and meatballs, one of Eli's favorites. As they ate, she could tell something was bothering him. He pushed his meatballs around his plate, his usual healthy appetite nowhere to be seen. "Mom," he finally said, his voice small. "Tommy said at school today that his dad said you were making stuff up about being a hero." Rachel put down her fork, her heart aching. She reached across the table and took her son's hand. "Eli, look at me." His eyes met hers, full of worry and confusion. There are going to be times in life when people say unkind things. Sometimes they do it because they're hurting, sometimes because they don't understand, and sometimes just because they can. But what matters isn't what they say. It's what we know to be true in our hearts. "But why are they being mean about you? You're the bravest person I know." Rachel squeezed his hand. "Just ignore the whispers, sweetheart. The truth has a way of coming out in the end." After dinner, she helped Eli with his math homework and tucked him into bed. He hugged her extra tight tonight, as if trying to protect her from all the cruel words floating around town. Once she heard his soft snores from down the hall, Rachel sat alone at the kitchen table. The house was quiet, except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of crickets through the window. In the dim light, she finally let the tears come. They rolled silently down her cheeks as she stared at her hands. Hands that had once held a rifle, that had dragged wounded comrades to safety, that now served coffee and wiped tables and tucked her son into bed at night. The same hands that now wiped away tears of frustration and hurt. The worst part wasn't the whispers themselves. It was the way they made her question everything. Her place in the community, her decision to keep her service quiet all these years, her ability to protect Eli from the ugliness that could exist in people's hearts. She sat there in the quiet kitchen, shoulders shaking with silent sobs, feeling more alone than she had since the day she'd lost her husband. The morning sun painted golden stripes across the weathered steps of First Baptist Church. Rachel Turner stood at the bottom, her fingers fidgeting with the strap of her purse. Beside her, Eli bounced on his toes, already dressed in his Sunday best, a crisp blue button-down and khaki pants that still showed fresh iron creases. "Come on, Mom," he urged, tugging at her sleeve. "We're gonna be late." Rachel smoothed down her simple floral dress, one she hadn't worn in weeks. The familiar doubt crept in. Maybe they should just go home. Some of Derek's closest friends attended this church. The thought of their judgmental stares made her stomach knot. The old wooden doors creaked open, and Pastor Grace appeared on the porch. Her dark skin glowed in the morning light, and her silver hair was perfectly arranged beneath a deep purple hat. Her eyes found Rachel immediately, and a warm smile spread across her face. "Rachel Turner," Pastor Grace called out, her rich voice carrying across the courtyard. "The Lord must have heard my prayers, because here you are." The pastor descended the steps with surprising agility for her age, her arms opening wide. Before Rachel could retreat, she found herself wrapped in a gentle embrace that smelled of lavender and fresh bread. "Pastor Grace," Rachel managed, her voice thick. "I'm not sure if—" "Nonsense," Pastor Grace cut her off, keeping one arm around Rachel's shoulders. "You belong here just as much as anyone else." She turned to Eli with a wink. "And look at this young man, so handsome in his Sunday clothes." Eli beamed, standing a little straighter. "Thank you, ma'am." Inside, the church was cool and dim, sunlight filtering through stained glass windows in jewel-toned patterns. Rachel's heels clicked softly on the hardwood floor as Pastor Grace guided them to a pew near the middle. Not too front, not too back. A few heads turned their way, and Rachel heard the unmistakable buzz of whispers. "Hold your head high," Pastor Grace murmured, giving Rachel's shoulder a squeeze. "Truth is like cream in coffee. It always rises to the top." The organ began to play, its deep notes vibrating through the wooden pews. Rachel watched as the choir filed in, their robes swaying in perfect rhythm. Mrs. Jenkins, who always ordered the same breakfast at the diner, caught Rachel's eye and gave her a small wave. As the congregation stood for the first hymn, Rachel felt Eli's small hand slip into hers. His voice rose clear and true beside her, singing words she hadn't heard in months. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound." Pastor Grace took her place at the pulpit, adjusting her reading glasses. "Today," she began, her voice filling every corner of the sanctuary, "we're going to talk about judgment. Not God's judgment, we'll get to that, but the judgment we place on each other." Rachel's breath caught. She felt several pairs of eyes turn her way. "You see," Pastor Grace continued, "we humans have a terrible habit of thinking we know the whole story. We hear a whisper, a rumor, and we think we've got it all figured out." She paused, looking directly at a group of men who Rachel recognized as Derek's regular drinking buddies. But only God knows what's in a person's heart. Only He knows the full measure of someone's courage, their sacrifice, their truth. The sermon wove through stories of prejudice overcome, of misconceptions shattered, of grace extended to those who seemed least deserving. Rachel found herself leaning forward, drinking in every word. Beside her, Eli sketched in his ever-present notebook, but instead of his usual soldiers, he was drawing what looked like Pastor Grace, surrounded by rays of light. After the final hymn, Rachel expected the usual quick escape to the parking lot, but Pastor Grace had other plans. She stationed herself by the door, creating a bottleneck that forced everyone to pause and greet her, and by extension, Rachel and Eli, who stood nearby at the pastor's insistence. "Beautiful service, Pastor," Mrs. Thompson said, then turned to Rachel with warm eyes. "So good to see you here, dear. We've missed you." One by one, church members stopped to chat. Mr. Wilson, a Korean War veteran, clasped Rachel's hand in both of his. "Don't let them get to you, soldier," he said gruffly. Some folks wouldn't know real service if it saluted them in the face. Even those who had been whispering earlier seemed subdued, nodding politely as they passed. Pastor Grace's sermon had struck home, at least for the moment. "See?" Pastor Grace said as the last parishioners filtered out. "Sometimes people just need a gentle reminder of what's right." She touched Rachel's cheek with a weathered hand. "You come back next Sunday, you hear? This is your home too." Rachel felt something warm unfurl in her chest, something she hadn't felt in weeks. Hope, maybe, or faith. The morning sun was high now, turning the stained glass windows into kaleidoscopes of color across the empty pews. "Thank you," Rachel whispered, and meant it for more than just the invitation. Pastor Grace's eyes twinkled. "Don't thank me, child. Just keep showing up. Truth has a way of shining through, just like this Sunday morning light." Outside, the air had warmed considerably. Eli's hand found Rachel's again as they descended the church steps together. His notebook was tucked under his other arm, filled with new drawings and, Rachel suspected, a renewed sense of purpose. She felt it too, a quiet strength, a reminder that she wasn't alone. But as they reached the bottom step, Rachel's newfound peace faltered. Across the street, partially hidden in the shadow of the old oak tree, stood Derek Cole. His face was twisted in a scowl, eyes fixed on Rachel with undisguised contempt. The glare was so intense it seemed to cut through the peaceful Sunday morning like a knife. The kitchen was quiet, except for the gentle ticking of the wall clock and the occasional clink of Rachel's spoon against her teacup. Outside her window, crickets chirped their evening song as darkness settled over the small town. Steam rose from her chamomile tea, curling in the dim light from the overhead fixture. Rachel traced her finger around the rim of her cup, her mind drifting back to another evening. Years ago, when the air had been filled with different sounds, the whir of helicopter blades, distant explosions, and the steady breathing of her unit as they prepared for a night patrol. "Stay alert, stay alive," she whispered to herself, the old military mantra coming back naturally. A small smile touched her lips as she remembered Staff Sergeant Martinez's voice drilling those words into their heads during training. The tea's warmth spread through her hands, grounding her in the present moment. Her gaze settled on the folded American flag displayed in its triangle case on the nearby shelf. Next to it stood a framed photo of Tom, her late husband, in his dress uniform. His smile still made her heart ache. "What would you do, Tom?" she asked softly, her voice barely audible. The question hung in the still air of the kitchen. The memory of that fateful night in Afghanistan surfaced unbidden. The ambush had come without warning. A maze of narrow streets, suddenly erupting in gunfire. Rachel could still feel the weight of Martinez's body as she dragged him to safety, could still hear the shouts of her team as they fought their way clear. The Bronze Star Medal meant nothing compared to the lives she'd helped save that night. She set her tea down and walked to the shelf, carefully lifting the flag case. The fabric within was pristine, each fold precise and meaningful. Her fingers trembled slightly as she traced the edge of the case. "I had so much courage then," she murmured. "I knew exactly who I was and what I was fighting for." From down the hall came the sound of Eli turning over in his sleep. Rachel's heart swelled with love and determination. Her son's pride in her earlier that day at church, despite Derek's glares, had awakened something inside her, something that felt like the old strength she'd known in uniform. Moving back to the kitchen window, Rachel watched a car's headlights sweep past, illuminating the quiet street. Pastor Grace's words from that morning echoed in her mind. "Truth rises like cream, child. It always finds its way to the surface." Rachel remembered the way she'd led her unit, not with harsh words or intimidation, but with steady resolve and unwavering principle. She'd earned their respect through actions, not arguments. The same approach that had worked in combat could work here, in this different kind of battle. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark window. The woman she saw wasn't just a waitress or a widow or even a veteran. She was all of these things and more. Derek's lies couldn't change who she was or what she'd done. His rumors couldn't erase the lives she'd saved or the oaths she'd kept. Standing straighter, Rachel felt her military bearing return. Shoulders back, chin up, the posture of someone who'd faced worse odds and prevailed. The scared feeling that had plagued her since finding those flyers began to fade, replaced by something stronger: purpose. She walked to the kitchen table where her own service records lay scattered. Documents she'd pulled out earlier, fighting the urge to wave them in people's faces to prove Derek wrong. But that wasn't the answer. She'd never needed to prove herself with papers in the army, and she wouldn't start now. Instead, she began gathering the documents, organizing them neatly into a folder. Her Bronze Star citation caught her eye, not for the medal itself, but for the words describing that night: demonstrated exceptional courage under fire, placing the safety of her fellow soldiers above her own. Rachel stood at the kitchen counter, her hands pressed flat against its cool surface. The quiet house seemed to hold its breath as she made her decision. She wouldn't let Derek's bitterness poison what she'd built here. She wouldn't let his lies stand unchallenged. But most importantly, she wouldn't let him turn her into someone who fought with hatred instead of honor. Looking once more at Tom's photo, then down the hall toward Eli's room, Rachel felt her resolve crystallize. The woman who'd led soldiers through firefights wasn't gone. She'd just been waiting for another worthy mission. Her voice was soft but firm as she spoke into the darkness. This isn't over. The words weren't a threat or a declaration of war. They were a promise to herself, to her son, to Tom's memory, and to every person who'd ever believed in her. She would fight for her reputation, not with Derek's weapons of rumor and spite, but with the same steady courage that had earned her that Bronze Star in the first place. The kitchen clock continued its quiet ticking, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Rachel Turner, soldier, mother, survivor, stood ready to face whatever came next, just as she always had, with dignity, with determination, and with an unshakable faith in the power of truth. The morning sun streamed through Mabel's diner's windows, creating golden pools on the freshly wiped countertops. Rachel arrived early, her heart beating a little faster than usual as she rehearsed her idea in her mind. She found Mabel in the kitchen, already elbow-deep in pie dough. "Morning, Mabel," Rachel called out, tying her apron with practice motions. "Got a minute?" Mabel looked up, flour dusting her cheeks. "For you? Always, honey." She wiped her hands on her apron and gestured to a nearby stool. "What's on your mind?" Rachel took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about everything that's happened. All the rumors, the whispers." She straightened her shoulders. "And I realized something. Instead of just defending myself, maybe I should show people who I really am through actions." Mabel's eyes softened with understanding. "Go on. What if we started hosting free meals for veterans once a week?" Rachel's words came faster now, carried by enthusiasm. "We could call it Heroes Night, or something similar. Create a space where veterans can come together, share stories, find support." "That's quite an undertaking," Mabel said thoughtfully, returning to her pie dough. Her rolling pin moved rhythmically as she considered the idea. "I know it's asking a lot," Rachel admitted, "but I've seen how many veterans in town struggle. Some can barely afford a decent meal. Others just need somewhere to belong." Her voice grew quiet. "Somewhere they don't have to explain themselves." Mabel's rolling pin stopped mid-motion. She looked at Rachel with new eyes, seeing not just her waitress, but the soldier who'd risked everything for others. "Tell me more about how you see this working." Rachel pulled a folded paper from her pocket, smoothing it on the counter. "I've worked out some numbers. If we offer a simple menu, maybe meatloaf, chicken pot pie, that sort of thing, and limit it to Wednesday nights when business is usually slower." Mabel peered at Rachel's neat handwriting, noting the careful calculations. "You've really thought this through, haven't you?" "Yes, ma'am." Rachel's fingers traced the edge of the paper. "I'll volunteer my time on those nights. Maybe we could put up a donation jar for civilians who want to help, and I know some of the regulars might pitch in too." The kitchen fell silent, except for the quiet hum of the refrigerator. Mabel walked to the sink, washing her hands slowly. When she turned back, her face broke into a warm smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "Honey, do you know why I hired you?" She didn't wait for an answer. Because I saw something special in you. That same something is shining through right now. She dried her hands on a towel. Let's do it. Rachel's eyes widened. Really? Really? Mabel nodded firmly. And not just because it's a good cause. This town needs more people willing to step up and make a difference. She reached for her recipe box. We'll start planning the menu today. They spent the next hour working out details between serving regular customers. Rachel's notepad filled with ideas, possible menu items, ways to spread the word, local veterans they could personally invite. Her handwriting grew more confident with each line, matching the growing certainty in her heart. As the morning rush wound down, Eli burst through the diner door, his backpack bouncing. "Mom, I finished my homework at school so I could help today." Rachel hugged him close, breathing in the familiar scent of crayons and notebook paper. "Perfect timing, sweetheart. We're starting something new at the diner, and I need your artistic skills." Eli's face lit up. "Really? What are we doing?" Rachel pulled out some blank paper and set it before him at the counter. "We're going to make flyers for a special dinner night for veterans. Think you can draw something patriotic? Like soldiers and flags?" Eli grabbed his colored pencils from his backpack. "I can do that." For the next hour, Eli worked diligently, while Rachel served customers. His tongue poked out in concentration as he drew careful lines and added splashes of red, white, and blue. Customers paused to admire his work, offering encouraging words that made him beam with pride. When the lunch rush ended, Rachel gathered the completed flyers. Eli had created a beautiful border of American flags around the text she'd written. Heroes Night at Mabel's Diner. Free meals for veterans every Wednesday. Because service deserves service. "These are perfect," Rachel said, ruffling Eli's hair. "Want to help me put them up around town?" Eli nodded enthusiastically, already heading for the door. They walked down Main Street together, the afternoon sun warm on their backs. At each store window, Eli carefully held the flyers while Rachel taped them up. "Mom?" Eli asked as they posted a flyer at the hardware store. "Is this because of what Mr. Derrick said about you?" Rachel paused, choosing her words carefully. "Sort of, honey, but it's more than that." She knelt to meet his eyes. "Sometimes, when people say unkind things, the best answer isn't to argue back. It's to show them who you really are by helping others. Like when you saved those soldiers?" Eli's eyes shone with pride. "Yes," Rachel smiled, standing and taking his hand. "And sometimes being brave means starting something new, even when you're scared it might not work." They continued down the street, leaving a trail of hope behind them in the form of bright flyers catching the afternoon light. The afternoon sun bathed Mabel's Diner in a warm, golden light. The place hummed with activity as veterans of all ages filled the booths and counter seats. Some wore their old service caps proudly, while others came in simple civilian clothes, but all carried themselves with that unmistakable military bearing. Rachel moved between tables with a coffee pot in hand, filling cups and listening to snippets of conversation. Her own uniform days felt closer than ever as she caught familiar phrases and terms that only veterans would know. "This coffee's better than anything we had in the mess hall," chuckled an elderly man wearing a Vietnam veteran cap, his weathered hands wrapped around the warm mug as Rachel topped it off. "That's not saying much, sir," Rachel replied with a gentle smile. "I remember the coffee overseas tasting like motor oil." The veteran laughed heartily. "You got that right, ma'am. Say, you served?" Rachel nodded, her bronze star pin catching the light on her apron. "Yes, sir. Army. 2 tours in Afghanistan. Thank you for your service," he said with genuine respect, "and for this meal. It means a lot." At another table, a young woman in her 20s sat alone, her prosthetic leg visible beneath her shorts. Rachel approached with a fresh plate of meatloaf. "Here you go," Rachel said warmly. "Would you like more gravy?" The woman looked up, her eyes brightening. "This is amazing. I haven't had a home-cooked meal like this since coming back." Rachel noticed the woman's hands trembling slightly as she picked up her fork. She'd seen that tremor before, in herself and others. "I'm Rachel," she offered. "Marine Corps? How'd you know?" The woman smiled. "Just a feeling. We veterans can spot each other sometimes. Jessica Martinez, the woman introduced herself. 2 years back from Iraq. She hesitated, then added quietly. Still getting used to civilian life. Rachel pulled up a chair for a moment, sensing Jessica needed to talk. That transition isn't easy. I remember feeling like I was speaking a different language than everyone else. Jessica's shoulders relaxed slightly. Exactly. People try to understand, but unless you've been there, you're not alone, Rachel assured her. That's why we started this. Sometimes just being around others who get it helps. Across the diner, Mabel was beaming as she served pie to a table of older veterans. The regular customers had gladly given up their usual tables for the special event, many even staying to buy meals for the veterans or simply to shake hands and say thanks. Mr. Henry, the retired postal worker who had defended Rachel weeks ago, sat at the counter talking with 2 Army veterans about their shared experiences in different wars. Their laughter carried across the diner, bridging decades of service. "Mom," Eli's voice caught Rachel's attention. He burst through the diner's door, just back from school, his backpack still on. "Can I help serve?" Rachel handed him a clean apron. "Of course, honey. But homework first. Already did most of it at study hall," he said proudly, tying the apron around his waist. It was too big, but his enthusiasm made up for it. "I want to hear their stories." An older veteran with silver hair waved Eli over. "Young man, come here a minute." He pulled out a worn photograph from his wallet. "That's me at about your age, standing next to my daddy's diner. He did something like this after World War II. Eli's eyes widened. "Really? Did you help serve too?" "Sure did. Learned more from those veterans than I ever did in school." The man winked at Rachel. "You've got a fine boy there, ma'am." Rachel watched as Eli carefully filled water glasses, soaking in every word from the veterans who shared their stories. Her heart swelled with pride, not just for her son, but for this moment, this gathering of people who understood sacrifice and service. Pastor Grace arrived with a basket of fresh rolls from her church's kitchen. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," she said, setting them by the counter. "Look at all these people coming together." Rachel wiped her hands on her apron. "I never expected such a turnout. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest ripples," Pastor Grace observed. "You're doing good work here, child." As the afternoon light began to fade, more veterans continued to arrive. Some came alone, others with family members. Each one was welcomed with warm food and warmer smiles. The diner had become more than just a place to eat. It was a sanctuary of understanding, a place where war stories could be shared without judgment, where the weight of memory could be shouldered together. A young veteran with a service dog settled into a corner booth. Rachel approached with a bowl of water for the dog and a menu for him. "Welcome to Mabel's," she said. "Thanks," he replied quietly, his service dog settling at his feet. "Someone at the VA mentioned this place. Everything's on the house for veterans today," Rachel explained. "Take your time. Order whatever you'd like." The man's tense expression softened. "I haven't been out much lately. Crowds, you know." Rachel nodded, understanding. "Corner booth is quieter. We can turn down the music if you need." "This is good," he said, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "This is really good." Outside in the parking lot, Derek Cole's truck idled in the growing dusk. Through the diner's windows, the scene inside was clearly visible. Veterans sharing meals and stories, Rachel moving among them with grace and purpose, her son helping proudly, the community coming together in ways he hadn't expected. Derek's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white with tension. The diner's warm lights spilled out into the darkening evening, but he remained in his truck, watching silently as the scene unfolded before him. Through the windshield, he could see Rachel stopping at each table, refilling coffee cups, listening to stories, sharing quiet words of understanding. Her Bronze Star pin gleamed on her apron as she moved through the diner, not as a waitress serving customers, but as a fellow veteran welcoming comrades home. Derek's grip on the steering wheel didn't loosen as he sat there in the growing darkness, watching the warmth and connection he'd tried so hard to dismiss. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Mabel's diner, casting long shadows across the checkerboard floor. The breakfast rush had dwindled to just a few regulars nursing their coffee cups when the bell above the door chimed. Rachel looked up from wiping down a table and froze. Derek Cole stood in the doorway, his usual swagger notably absent. He shuffled to the counter without meeting anyone's eyes, slumping onto a stool near the register. His shoulders were hunched, his work jacket wrinkled like he'd slept in it. The silence in the diner grew thick as other customers watched, waiting to see what would happen. Rachel took a deep breath, steadying herself. She grabbed a clean mug and the fresh pot of coffee, moving behind the counter with practiced efficiency. Her hands trembled slightly as she approached, but her voice remained steady. "Coffee?" Derek nodded without looking up. "Black," he mumbled, his voice lacking its usual edge of mockery. Rachel poured carefully, maintaining a professional distance. The rich aroma of fresh coffee filled the space between them. Through the kitchen window, Mabel caught Rachel's eye, raising her eyebrows in silent question. Rachel gave a small nod to indicate she was okay. The regular customers pretended to focus on their breakfast, but their attention remained fixed on the unexpected scene unfolding at the counter. Derek wrapped his hands around the warm mug, but didn't drink. His knuckles were scraped raw, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. Rachel noticed a slight tremor in his hands, something she recognized from her own difficult days after returning from deployment. "Anything else?" Rachel asked, already stepping back. Derek's jaw worked silently for a moment. "Just coffee," he said, then added quietly, "Thanks." The word hung in the air between them, unfamiliar and awkward. Rachel busied herself with refilling sugar dispensers, keeping Derek in her peripheral vision. He sat hunched over his coffee, occasionally lifting the mug to his lips but barely drinking. Minutes ticked by. The morning regulars finished their meals and left, the bell chiming their departure. New customers arrived, glancing curiously at Derek's solitary figure at the counter. Rachel served other tables, but always remained aware of his presence, like a soldier monitoring a potential threat. After his third coffee refill, Derek's posture changed. He seemed to curl further into himself, his breathing becoming more ragged. Rachel was wiping down the counter nearby when she heard him speak, so softly she almost missed it. Jimmy always wanted his coffee with 3 sugars. Rachel paused in her wiping, careful to keep her movements slow and non-threatening. "Jimmy? My little brother." Derek's voice was rough, like he'd swallowed gravel. "Used to tell him real men drink it black. Now I'd give anything to watch him dump sugar in his cup again." Rachel felt the familiar ache in her chest, the one that appeared whenever she thought about lost comrades. She set down her rag, maintaining a respectful distance. Derek stared into his coffee as if reading fortune in its depths. He was just a kid when he signed up, wanted to make something of himself. His knuckles whitened around the mug. Afghanistan. 2 years in, and then. He trailed off, his throat working. The morning light caught the silver threading through Derek's hair, making him look older, more vulnerable. Rachel recognized the weight of survivor's guilt in the slope of his shoulders. She'd seen it in too many mirrors, carried it herself too many times. "I should have been there," Derek muttered, more to himself than to her. "Big brother's supposed to look out for the little one, right? But I stayed here, running my mouth while he—" His voice cracked slightly. Rachel kept her distance, despite the instinct to offer comfort. The pain in Derek's voice was raw and familiar, but she remembered the cruel words he'd hurled at her, the lies he'd spread. Empathy warred with caution in her chest. Derek's coffee had gone cold, but he clutched the mug like an anchor. "Funny thing is, he wrote me about you once." His voice was barely above a whisper now. "Said there was this female sergeant who saved his buddy's whole unit. Never knew it was you until—" He fell silent again, lost in memories. Rachel stood perfectly still, her heart pounding with unexpected revelation. The diner's usual morning sounds faded to background noise. The sizzle of bacon, the clink of dishes, the murmur of conversations, all seemed distant and unreal. Derek pushed his coffee cup away finally, leaving a crumpled bill on the counter. Without looking at Rachel, he stood up, his movements stiff and uncertain. "Jimmy never came home," he said quietly, paused, then walked out of the diner without another word. Rachel watched him go, her hand pressed against the counter for support. The morning sun caught the dog tags she always wore beneath her uniform, warming them against her skin. She felt the weight of them, the weight of all they represented, more keenly than usual. Through the window, she saw Derek get into his truck, sit there for a long moment, then drive away. The empathy she felt was real, a soldier's understanding of another's pain. But the wariness remained. She'd learned the hard way that pain could make people unpredictable, sometimes dangerous. She picked up his coffee cup, still half full and cold, and washed it with careful attention, her movements measured and deliberate. The morning continued its steady rhythm around her, but something had shifted, a crack in the armor of anger that had surrounded Derek Cole, revealing the wounded man beneath. Dark clouds loomed over Mabel's diner as Rachel finished her evening shift. The first drops of rain pattered against the windows while she counted her tips, occasionally glancing at the weather through the glass. She'd have to make a dash to her car. She hadn't brought an umbrella. Thunder rumbled in the distance as she pulled her worn jean jacket tighter around her shoulders. The diner's neon sign cast a pink glow across the wet pavement when she stepped outside, fumbling with her keys. The parking lot was nearly empty, just her old Honda and a familiar pickup truck. Her heart skipped a beat when she spotted Derek Cole leaning against the brick wall near her car. He wasn't with his usual group of friends. Something about his posture seemed different. Shoulders hunched, hands stuffed deep in his pockets, eyes fixed on the ground. Rachel hesitated, considering going back inside to wait him out. But before she could turn, Derek spoke. "Don't go," he said, his voice lacking its usual edge. "Please." Rain fell steadily now, creating a curtain between them. Rachel stood her ground, keys clutched tightly in her hand. "What do you want, Derek?" He pushed off the wall but didn't move closer. "I need to tell you something." His voice was rough, barely audible above the rain. "About my brother." Rachel remained silent, watching him struggle with whatever he needed to say. Water dripped from his baseball cap, and his flannel shirt was getting soaked. "Tommy," Derek continued, clearing his throat. "That was his name, my little brother." He looked up at the sky, blinking against the rain. "He always wanted to serve. Said it was his calling, you know. But his voice cracked. "I told him he was crazy. Said he'd get himself killed." Rachel felt the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. She'd never seen Derek like this, vulnerable, stripped of his usual anger. "He enlisted anyway," Derek went on. "Made it through training, got deployed to Afghanistan. Won." He swallowed hard. "I should have gone with him, should have had his back. That's what big brothers are supposed to do, right?" The rain drummed steadily on the pavement as Derek's words hung in the air. Rachel thought of her own unit, the bonds forged in combat, the weight of responsibility for others' lives. 3 months in, Derek's voice grew hoarse. 3 months, and we got the call. IED on patrol. He pressed his fist against the brick wall. He never even made it to his 21st birthday. Rachel watched as Derek's shoulders began to shake. Whether from the cold rain or emotion, she couldn't tell. "I see you in that uniform picture behind the counter," he continued, "serving meals to those vets, listening to their stories. You're everything I should have been, everything Tommy was." His laugh was bitter. "And here I am, the coward who stayed home, trying to tear you down because every time I look at you, I see what I failed to do." The rain had soaked through Rachel's jacket now, but she barely noticed. She thought of all the times Derek had mocked her, spread rumors, tried to diminish her service. It all made a twisted kind of sense now. His anger wasn't really about her at all. "I watch you with your boy," Derek said quietly. "The way you hold your head up, even when people whisper. The way you honor what you did over there. And He shook his head. "I can't stand it. Can't stand that you came home when Tommy didn't." Rachel took a careful step forward. "Derek, don't," he cut her off. "Don't try to make it okay. Nothing makes it okay." He pushed away from the wall, rainwater streaming down his face. "I just needed you to know, to understand why I've been such a—" He trailed off, unable to finish. Rachel thought of all the soldiers she'd lost, the weight of survival that sometimes felt heavier than grief. "You're not alone in grief," she said softly. Derek stared at her for a long moment, his face a mixture of pain and confusion. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his boots splashing through puddles as he disappeared into the rainy darkness. Rachel stood in the rain, watching his retreat. The Derek Cole, who had just bared his soul, was a far cry from the town bully who had tormented her for months. In his broken confession, she recognized a pain she knew all too well, the burden of being the one who remained behind. His truck's engine roared to life, headlights cutting through the rain as he pulled out of the parking lot. Rachel finally moved toward her car, her clothes completely drenched. The revelation of Derek's pain didn't excuse his actions, but it offered something she hadn't expected: understanding. The rain continued to fall as Rachel sat in her car, key in the ignition but not yet turned. The ghost of Derek's grief lingered in the air, mixing with her own memories of loss. Sometimes the hardest battles, she knew, were the ones fought long after leaving the battlefield, the daily struggle with guilt, grief, and the weight of survival. The veterans' night at Mabel's Diner was in full swing. The familiar aroma of coffee and fresh apple pie filled the warm air as Rachel moved between tables, refilling cups and sharing gentle smiles with the men and women who'd served. Some wore their old service caps proudly. Others just carried themselves with that unmistakable military bearing she knew so well. Eli sat at the counter, his sketchbook open as always. Tonight, instead of his usual superhero drawings, he was carefully sketching the veterans, capturing their faces with surprising detail. Rachel caught glimpses of his work whenever she passed by, her heart swelling with pride at his thoughtful attention. Pastor Grace had come too, sitting in her usual corner booth. She nodded encouragingly at Rachel throughout the evening, her warm presence a steady comfort. The elderly preacher had become a regular at these events, offering quiet counsel to anyone who needed it. The bell above the door chimed, and Rachel looked up to see Derek Cole step inside. The diner's chatter dimmed slightly. He'd been coming in more frequently lately, always alone, always quiet. Tonight, he looked different, clean-shaven, wearing a pressed button-down shirt instead of his usual work clothes. Rachel watched from behind the counter as he took a seat at an empty table, his fingers drumming nervously on the worn formica surface. She approached with a coffee pot, maintaining the professional courtesy she'd developed over the past few weeks. "Coffee, Derek?" He nodded, but his eyes were distant, focused on something beyond the steam rising from his cup. The conversations around them gradually resumed their normal volume, veterans sharing stories of basic training, deployments, and homecomings. An older veteran at a nearby table was describing a rescue mission in detail, his voice carrying across the diner. "Sometimes the bravest thing isn't what you do in the fight, it's how you carry yourself after." Derek's hand tightened around his coffee cup. Rachel noticed his knuckles turning white, saw the muscle in his jaw working. She'd recognized that look before in the mirror, in other veterans' faces. It was the look of someone carrying a heavy burden that needed to be set down. Suddenly, Derek pushed his chair back and stood. The scraping sound drew everyone's attention. He cleared his throat, his voice trembling but clear. "I need to say something." His words hung in the air as the diner fell silent. Even the clink of silverware stopped. "I've been sitting here, listening to all of you, hearing your stories, watching Rachel Ms. Turner serve everyone with such dignity." Rachel froze by the counter, coffee pot still in hand. Eli set down his pencil, eyes wide. Derek's voice grew stronger, though his hands shook. "I've been wrong, so wrong. I've said terrible things about Rachel Turner, spread lies about her service." He swallowed hard. "Truth is, she's braver than I ever was." The silence in the diner deepened. Rachel could hear the soft hum of the overhead fans, the distant sound of traffic outside. "My brother died in Afghanistan," Derek continued, his voice cracking. "And instead of honoring his sacrifice, I've been taking out my guilt on someone who served with the same courage he did. Someone who came back when he didn't." Pastor Grace leaned forward in her booth, her eyes glistening with compassion. "I never enlisted," Derek admitted, looking down at his hands. "I let my little brother go alone. And when Rachel came to town, seeing her strength, her honor, it reminded me of everything I wasn't. Everything I'd failed to be." He turned to face Rachel directly. "You didn't just serve overseas. You've served this town every day since you got here, with kindness, with forgiveness." His voice grew thick with emotion. "Even when I was cruel, you showed mercy. That's real courage." Rachel stood perfectly still, feeling the weight of every eye in the diner. She saw Eli's face shining with pride, saw the veterans nodding in understanding. "I'm sorry," Derek said, the words coming out raw and honest. "I'm sorry for trying to tear down something beautiful because of my own shame. You are everything I said you weren't. You're special. You're brave. You're exactly what this town needs." The silence held for a moment longer. Then someone started clapping. It was Mr. Henry, the retired postal worker who'd first revealed Rachel's bronze star. Others joined in, the applause spreading through the diner like a wave. Some of the veterans stood, showing their respect not just for Rachel, but for Derek's honesty as well. Eli jumped up from his seat at the counter, his face beaming with joy. The sound of clapping filled every corner of the diner, accompanied by murmurs of approval and a few emotional sniffs. Rachel felt something shift in that moment, not just in Derek, but in the whole town. It was as if a weight had been lifted, a darkness dispelled. The applause wasn't just for her or Derek's apology. It was for the power of truth, the possibility of change, the triumph of grace over bitterness. She saw it in the faces around her, the veterans with their knowing looks, Pastor Grace's gentle smile, Mabel wiping tears from behind the register, and most precious of all, Eli's shining eyes. This wasn't just a moment of personal vindication, it was the town's heart, opening, growing, healing. The applause continued, filling the diner with its warm, honest sound, and Rachel felt tears pricking at her own eyes. Not tears of sadness or hurt this time, but of something deeper, hope, perhaps, or gratitude for the mysterious ways that courage could transform not just battles abroad, but the daily struggles of the heart at home. Rachel sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by colorful markers and large sheets of poster paper. The evening sun painted warm stripes across the wooden surface, catching dust motes in its golden light. Eli hunched over his section of paper, his tongue poking out in concentration as he drew. "Maybe we could put a reading corner here," Rachel suggested, pointing to a blank space on their rough floor plan. "With comfortable chairs where veterans could sit and relax." Eli's eyes lit up. "And books about heroes." He grabbed a blue marker and started sketching little rectangles to represent bookshelves. "Like the ones you told me about, Mom. The soldiers who saved their friends." Rachel watched her son draw, her heart swelling with pride. His small hands moved confidently across the paper, adding details she wouldn't have thought of. A coffee station near the entrance. A wall for artwork made by veterans' children. "What about here?" Eli asked, tapping an empty corner of their sketch. "Could we make a special place for people who feel sad? Like when you said some soldiers come home with hurting hearts?" Rachel reached over and squeezed his shoulder. "That's perfect, sweetie. We could make it a quiet space, maybe with some plants and soft lighting." She added gentle curves to represent comfortable seating, thinking of the many nights she'd sat alone, trying to find peace after returning home. The idea had come to her during last week's Veterans Night at the diner. Watching former service members connect over coffee and pie, she'd realized they needed more than just monthly meals. They needed a permanent place to belong. "Can I design the sign?" Eli asked, already reaching for a fresh sheet of paper. "It should be big and colorful so everyone can see it." "Of course you can." Rachel smiled, remembering how his father used to draw with him. "What should we call it?" Eli thought for a moment, marker hovering over the paper. "How about Welcome Home Center? Because that's what you always say soldiers need most, to feel at home again." Rachel felt tears prick at her corners of her eyes. "That's beautiful, Eli. Perfect." They worked together as the afternoon light shifted, adding details to their dream. Rachel sketched out practical things: a small kitchen, office space for helping with paperwork, a medical consultation room. Eli added his own touches: an American flag mural, a garden out back for growing happy thoughts, and a special wall where veterans could hang pictures of their families. "Look, Mom!" Eli held up his latest drawing. "I made a place where kids can wait while their parents talk to helpers, with toys and books and everything." His sketch showed a cheerful corner full of stick-figure children playing. Rachel pulled him into a tight hug. "You think of everything, don't you? Just like your dad used to. Eli snuggled closer. Do you think he would like our idea? Oh, honey. Rachel kissed the top of his head. He would love it. He always wanted to help other veterans too. They were adding final touches to their plans when a knock at the diner's front door made them both look up. Through the glass, Rachel could see Derek Cole standing awkwardly on the sidewalk, shifting from foot to foot. Stay here, she told Eli quietly, moving to unlock the door. The bell chimed softly as she opened it. Derek wouldn't meet her eyes. His usual aggressive stance was gone, replaced by something almost apologetic. Without a word, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a white envelope. He placed it carefully on the counter, then turned to leave. Derek? Rachel called softly. He paused in the doorway, but didn't turn around. Thank you, she said, though she hadn't yet opened the envelope. He gave a short nod, then walked quickly away, disappearing around the corner. Rachel picked up the envelope, feeling its weight. Inside was a stack of bills, several $100s, and a small note that read simply, "For the center. My brother would have needed it." Rachel pressed the envelope close to her heart, looking back at Eli, still surrounded by their colorful plans. Their dream felt a little more real now, built not just on hope, but on the beginning of community support. The bell chimed again as Derek left, leaving Rachel holding the envelope, its contents representing not just money, but the first real step toward healing, both for the town and for Derek himself. The streetlights cast long shadows across Main Street as Rachel's old sedan pulled into Mabel's diner's parking lot. It was nearly midnight. She'd forgotten her phone charger after her evening shift and needed it for tomorrow. The diner stood dark and quiet, usually a peaceful sight at this hour. But something was wrong. Very wrong. Rachel's headlights swept across the front of the building, and her heart stopped. Jagged shards of glass glittered on the sidewalk where the big front windows had been smashed. The light caught something else. Dark red paint, dripping down the white-painted brick wall. Her hands trembled as she parked and stepped out into the cool night air. The crunch of broken glass under her shoes made her wince. As she got closer, the spray-painted letters became clear. "Fraud," screamed across the wall in angry crimson strokes. "No," Rachel whispered, her voice catching. "No, no, no." She fumbled for her phone, hands shaking so badly she could hardly dial. The police. She needed to call the police. And Mabel. Poor Mabel. While she waited for the patrol car, Rachel stood rooted to the spot, staring at the destruction. The diner, her safe haven, her lifeline for herself and Eli, had been violated. The place where veterans gathered to find fellowship now bore wounds of its own. The vintage neon "Open" sign lay shattered on the ground. Through the broken windows, she could see overturned chairs and tables. Someone had really gone on a rampage. The sight made her physically ill. Squad car lights soon painted the scene in alternating red and blue. Officer Martinez, who often stopped in for coffee during her morning shifts, stepped out with her partner. "Miss Turner," Martinez said softly, taking in the damage. "I'm so sorry. We'll need your statement." Rachel described finding the diner, her voice steady despite her churning emotions. Years of military training helped her maintain composure, even as her insides felt like shattered glass. "We got calls about a disturbance here about an hour ago," Martinez's partner said, flipping through his notes. "Witnesses reported a man matching Derek Cole's description." Rachel's knees went weak. She grabbed the doorframe for support. "They said he was extremely intoxicated." Martinez continued gently, screaming and throwing bottles. "We have multiple confirmations it was him." The betrayal hit Rachel like a physical blow. After everything, the apology, the donation, the seeming change of heart, Derek had destroyed it all in one drunken rage. The hope she'd begun to feel, the belief that people could change, lay in pieces like the glass at her feet. Mabel arrived, still in her nightgown under a hastily thrown-on coat. Her face crumpled at the sight of her beloved diner. "Oh, Rachel," she breathed, pulling her into a tight hug. "Oh, honey." Rachel stood stiffly in the embrace, too numb to return it. The red paint seemed to mock her, screaming "fraud" over and over in her mind. All her work to build trust, to prove herself through actions rather than words, had it meant nothing? The officers took photos and gathered evidence, their flashlight beams dancing across the destruction. The night seemed to stretch endlessly, as Rachel answered questions, signed statements, helped Mabel assess the damage. But through it all, a cold emptiness spread through her chest. She thought of Eli's proud face when Derek had apologized. How her son had begun to believe in the power of forgiveness, of change. How would she explain this to him? "We'll find him," Martinez assured her, touching her arm. "He won't get away with this." But Rachel barely heard her. The victory she'd thought she'd won, not just over Derek's hatred, but over the darkness of distrust itself, had been an illusion. The community she'd worked so hard to build felt suddenly fragile, built on shifting sand instead of solid ground. Dawn was breaking by the time Rachel finally drove home. The rising sun should have brought hope, but she felt nothing but crushing despair. Derek's betrayal represented more than just property damage. It was the shattering of a dream, the death of a belief that love could overcome hate, that wounds could truly heal. She parked in her driveway, but couldn't bring herself to go inside yet. Eli would be waking up soon, expecting his mom to be strong, to have answers. But right now, Rachel had none. She laid her head on the steering wheel, and finally let the tears come, shoulders shaking with silent sobs in the growing light of dawn. The woman who had faced gunfire without flinching, who had carried wounded comrades to safety under impossible odds, felt utterly defeated by this betrayal. The diner could be repaired, the paint could be cleaned away, but her faith in the possibility of redemption lay in ruins. A text message lit up her phone. Mabel, saying insurance would cover the damages, that they'd rebuild stronger than ever. The words blurred through Rachel's tears. Physical repairs seemed hollow compared to the deeper damage done. She thought of the veterans who gathered at the diner, how they'd begun to heal together, share their stories, find purpose again. Now their sanctuary had been violated by someone who couldn't face his own demons, who had chosen destruction over growth. The morning paper would be arriving soon, carrying news of the vandalism. Whispers would start again. The town would divide once more. Everything she'd built seemed to be crumbling, and Rachel felt powerless to stop it. She sat in her car as the sun rose fully, casting long shadows across her driveway. The woman who had always found a way forward, who had survived war and loss and countless challenges, felt utterly lost. Derek's act of destruction had done more than damage property. It had shaken her very foundation of belief in the possibility of change. The sound of her neighbor's door opening finally forced Rachel to move. She couldn't let Eli see her like this. Wiping her eyes, she grabbed her purse and stepped out of the car. But the weight of despair followed her to the front door, settling around her shoulders like a heavy cloak she couldn't shake off. Inside, she heard Eli stirring upstairs. Her son would need breakfast, need to get ready for school, need his mother to be strong. But for the first time in years, Rachel wasn't sure she had any strength left to give. The morning sun streamed through the remaining intact windows of Mabel's diner, casting broken patterns across the freshly mopped floor. Rachel moved mechanically between tables, her steps heavy, her usual warm smile replaced by a tight, guarded expression. The usual morning buzz was missing, replaced by whispers and sidelong glances. Where regulars once filled every booth, now scattered customers sat far apart, their conversations hushed. The coffee pot in Rachel's hand felt heavier than usual as she made her rounds, trying to ignore the plywood boards covering the smashed windows. "More coffee, Mrs. Peterson?" Rachel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The elderly woman nodded, not meeting Rachel's eyes. "Yes, dear. Thank you." The bell above the door chimed, and Rachel's shoulders tensed instinctively. It was just Mr. Henry. But she couldn't shake the nervous flutter in her stomach that had taken up residence since the vandalism. "Morning, Rachel," he said softly, settling into his usual spot at the counter. His kind eyes held concern. "How are you holding up?" Rachel poured his coffee without being asked. "I'm fine." The words came out flat, rehearsed. She'd said them so many times in the past few days, they'd lost all meaning. Mabel emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Rachel, honey, those flyers for tomorrow's Veterans Night." Should I put them up? Rachel's hand trembled slightly as she set down the coffee pot. Actually, I think we should cancel this week's event. Cancel? Mabel's face fell. But the veterans look forward to— I can't. Rachel's voice cracked. Not after. I just can't face them right now. The diner fell even quieter, if that was possible. Rachel felt the weight of eyes on her back as she retreated to the kitchen, seeking refuge among the steam and clatter of dishes. Through the kitchen window, she could see the spot where Derek had stood just days ago, making his seemingly heartfelt apology. The memory felt like a knife twist in her gut. She'd believed him. Worse, she'd let others believe in him too. The morning dragged on. Regular customers who usually chatted for hours left after quick, quiet meals. The lunch rush never materialized. By early afternoon, Rachel had wiped the same spotless counter 3 times just to keep her hands busy. I called the Veterans Center, Mabel said gently, appearing at Rachel's side. They understand about canceling, said to take all the time you need. Rachel nodded, throat tight. Thanks. She glanced at the wall where they'd hung photos from previous veterans' nights, smiling faces, shared stories, healing happening right there in the diner. Now it felt like a mockery. The police said they're still looking for Derek, Mabel continued. Nobody's seen him since that night. It doesn't matter, Rachel said, her voice hollow. The damage is done. The afternoon stretched endlessly. Rachel moved through her tasks like a ghost, barely registering the sympathetic looks, the awkward silences. When her shift finally ended, she couldn't get out fast enough. The drive home was a blur. She pulled into her driveway just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across her small front yard. The porch light was on. Eli was home from his after-school program. Inside, she found him at the kitchen table. Homework spread out before him. His sketchbook was open too, but instead of his usual superhero drawings, she glimpsed what looked like designs for Veterans Center logos. Mom! He jumped up, his face bright, with hope that made her heart ache. I had an idea about the Veterans' Night. What if we— Eli? She cut him off gently, setting down her purse. I canceled Veterans' Night. His face fell. What? But why? Because— Rachel sank into a kitchen chair, suddenly exhausted. Because sometimes things don't work out the way we hope. Sometimes people let us down. But you said, we can't let bad people win, Eli protested, coming to stand beside her. You said that's why you served. To protect good people from bullies. That was different, Rachel whispered, staring at her hands. No, it wasn't. Eli's voice rose with emotion. You always said courage means doing what's right, even when it's hard. You said— Eli, please. Rachel's voice cracked. I can't. I just can't right now. Don't give up, Mom. Eli's eyes filled with tears. You always said courage means standing tall even when it hurts. Rachel looked at her son, this beautiful, brave boy who believed in her so completely. Her own words, reflected back at her through his pure faith, broke something inside her. She pulled him into a tight hug, feeling tears stream down her face. Eli hugged her back fiercely, his small shoulders shaking. They stayed that way for a long while, holding each other in the quiet kitchen as the last light faded outside. Rachel's tears fell silently, each one carrying the weight of shattered trust and broken dreams. Her son's words echoed in her mind. Standing tall even when it hurts. But right now, the hurt felt too big, too raw. The diner that had been her sanctuary, the community she'd tried to build, the trust she'd extended, it all lay in pieces, like the shattered glass on the sidewalk. She held her son tighter, wishing she could be the hero he saw in her. But tonight, she was just a woman with a broken heart, holding on to the one thing she knew would never betray her, the love of her child. The afternoon sun pierced through dirty blinds like needles, stabbing into Derek Cole's bloodshot eyes. Empty bottles littered the cramped trailer's floor, a maze of shame leading to where he lay, sprawled on his worn recliner. His head throbbed with each heartbeat, punishment for last night's rampage. The knock at his door was gentle but persistent. Derek groaned, pulling a grimy blanket over his head. Maybe if he stayed quiet, whoever it was would leave. Derek Cole, I know you're in there. Pastor Grace's firm voice carried through the thin door. And I'm not leaving until we talk. He squinted at his watch. 2:45 p.m. How long had he been out? The memories of last night came flooding back. The bottle of whiskey, the rage that built up inside him, the sound of breaking glass at the diner. His stomach churned. Go away, he croaked. The Lord gives us many chances, Derek, Pastor Grace called back. But we have to be willing to open the door. Derek staggered to his feet, steadying himself against the wall. Empty food containers and dirty clothes covered every surface. He caught his reflection in a clouded mirror. 3 days of stubble, dark circles under his eyes, a stranger's face staring back. The knocking continued, patient and rhythmic. Fine, he barked, stumbling toward the door. Just stop with the noise. He yanked it open, wincing at the sunlight. Pastor Grace stood there, her silver hair neat beneath her Sunday hat, her expression calm but determined. She carried a paper bag in one hand and her worn Bible in the other. You look terrible, she said matter-of-factly, stepping past him into the trailer. Didn't invite you in, Derek muttered, but moved aside anyway. Pastor Grace surveyed the mess, her lips pressed together. Without a word, she cleared off a chair and sat down, setting her Bible on the cluttered coffee table. Brought you some coffee and sandwiches, she said, placing the paper bag beside her. Thought you might need them. Derek slumped back into his recliner, rubbing his temples. If you're here to lecture me, I'm here because you're hurting, Pastor Grace interrupted. And hurt people hurt people. You don't know anything about me. I know you're carrying your brother's death like a stone around your neck. I know you see Rachel Turner's strength as a mirror of your own weakness. And I know last night wasn't really about her at all. Derek's jaw clenched. The hangover headache intensified, but something else hurt worse. The truth in her words, cutting through his defenses. You destroyed property, Derek. You betrayed people who were starting to trust you. But worse than that, you betrayed yourself. What do you want from me? His voice cracked. I want you to tell me about your brother. The question hit him like a physical blow. Nobody in town talked about Tommy anymore. It had been easier that way, letting people forget. Tommy was. Derek's throat tightened. He was everything I wasn't. Brave, dedicated. When he enlisted, He stopped. The words stuck. Go on, Pastor Grace encouraged softly. I should have gone with him, protected him. Instead, I stayed here, made excuses. And then one day, 2 soldiers showed up at Mom's door, and Derek's hands began to shake. Pastor Grace reached over and took one of his trembling hands in hers. Her skin was warm, her grip firm and reassuring. When I saw Rachel, Derek continued, his voice hollow, saw how she served, how she saved lives over there. It was like seeing Tommy, and I couldn't stand it. Couldn't stand seeing someone who did what I was too scared to do. So you tried to tear her down, Pastor Grace finished, to make her small enough that your own guilt wouldn't feel so big. Derek nodded, shame washing over him in waves. And when she showed kindness anyway, when people respected her, I couldn't take it. The whiskey made it worse, made me crazy with it. The bottle won't bring Tommy back, Pastor Grace said gently, and destroying Rachel won't ease your conscience. The truth of it broke something in Derek. His shoulders began to shake, and before he could stop it, deep sobs racked his body. Years of buried grief and guilt poured out of him. I ruined everything, he choked out between sobs. The one chance I had to make things right, to honor Tommy's memory. I destroyed it all. Pastor Grace moved to kneel beside his chair, her hand steady on his shoulder. It's never too late to change, Derek. Never too late to choose a better path. Derek's sobs continued, the pain of a decade finally finding its voice in his small, cluttered trailer, while Pastor Grace remained beside him, a quiet witness to the breaking of his walls. How? He managed to ask through his tears. How can anything ever be right again after what I've done? The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, Pastor Grace said, and admitting you've lost your way is that first step. Derek wiped roughly at his eyes with the back of his hand. His head still pounded, but something else had shifted, as if a weight he'd carried so long he'd forgotten it was there had begun to lift. "I've made such a mess," he whispered, looking around at the physical chaos of his trailer, a reflection of his inner turmoil. "Then it's time to start cleaning up," Pastor Grace said firmly. "Both in here," she gestured around the trailer. "And in here," she placed her hand over his heart. Derek bowed his head, fresh tears falling. The shame was still there, the grief still raw. But for the first time in years, something else flickered in his chest. A tiny spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to change. The morning mist clung to the grass like a gentle veil, turning the rows of white headstones into ghostly silhouettes. Rachel Turner's boots made soft impressions in the damp earth as she walked the familiar path through Fort Mitchell National Cemetery. The American flags, planted beside each marker, fluttered in the early breeze, a quiet tribute to those who had given everything. Eli trailed behind her, his small hand clutching a bunch of wildflowers they had picked on the drive over. His footsteps were careful, reverent, just as she had taught him. This place demanded respect, even from a 10-year-old boy. They stopped at a polished white stone that read, "Captain James Turner, beloved husband, father, and hero." Rachel knelt before it, her fingers tracing the engraved letters she knew by heart. Eli placed the wildflowers at the base of the headstone, then stepped back, giving his mother the moment she needed. "Hey, James," Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible above the rustling leaves. The morning sun was starting to burn through the mist, casting long shadows across the grounds. "I could really use your advice right now." She adjusted her position, settling onto the grass despite its dampness. Her diner uniform was hidden beneath her old army jacket. She had an afternoon shift later, but this couldn't wait. The weight of recent events pressed down on her shoulders like a heavy rucksack. "Everything's such a mess," she continued, running her fingers through the dewy grass. "I thought I was doing the right thing, showing compassion, trying to help others heal, but now," her voice caught, "now I don't know anymore." A cardinal landed on a nearby headstone, its bright red feathers a stark contrast to the white marble. Rachel watched it hop from stone to stone, a flash of life among the markers of those past. "Remember how you always said that the hardest battles aren't fought with weapons?" She smiled faintly at the memory. "You were right. These days, I'm fighting against doubt, against people's judgment, against my own fears." The morning air was cool against her cheeks, carrying the scent of fresh-cut grass and early autumn. Behind her, she could hear Eli's quiet footsteps as he walked among the nearby graves, reading the names with careful attention. "Derek reminded me so much of you at first, another soldier's brother, carrying that weight of loss. I thought maybe." She shook her head. "I thought maybe by helping him heal, I could honor your memory somehow. But he's so angry, so broken. And now he's destroyed everything we built." Rachel pulled her jacket tighter around herself, though the chill she felt came from within. "The diner windows can be replaced. But the trust? The hope people were starting to feel? That's harder to fix." A gentle breeze stirred the small American flag beside James's grave. Rachel reached out to straighten it, a habit from countless visits. "I'm tired, James. So tired of being strong, of always having to prove myself. Sometimes I wonder if it would be easier to just give up, move away, start fresh somewhere else." She glanced over her shoulder at Eli, who was now carefully straightening flags on other graves, showing the same attention to detail she had taught him. Pride warmed her heart, momentarily pushing back the darkness. "Our boy still draws his heroes," she continued, turning back to the headstone. "But now, he draws them in aprons, as well as uniforms. He sees courage in everyday things, just like you always did." The memory of James's smile flickered in her mind, bright and encouraging. "Pastor Grace says that true strength isn't in never falling, but in rising every time we fall. That sounds like something you would say." Rachel wiped at her eyes with the sleeve of her jacket. "But what if I don't have any more rising left in me?" The sun had fully emerged now, making the morning dew sparkle like scattered diamonds across the cemetery. Rachel sat in silence for a while, listening to the distant sound of traffic and the closer songs of morning birds. This place always brought her peace, even in her darkest moments. "I miss your laugh," she whispered. "I miss the way you could make any situation better just by being there. I miss your strength." Her fingers traced the dates on the headstone. "The town's starting to remind me of that convoy in Kandahar. People taking sides, tension building, waiting for the next explosion. Only this time, I don't have you watching my six." The sound of Eli's footsteps approached, then stopped a respectful distance away. Rachel could sense him waiting, patient beyond his years. She knew she should wrap up her visit, they both had responsibilities waiting. But something kept her kneeling there, seeking answers in the silent stone. "I don't know what to do, James," she admitted. "Fight back? Turn the other cheek? Run away? What would you tell me if you were here?" As if in answer, a warm ray of sunlight broke through the trees, illuminating the headstone and making the engraved words shine. Rachel blinked against the sudden brightness. The cardinal she had noticed earlier swooped down, landed briefly on James's headstone, then took flight again, its wings catching the light. Rachel slowly rose to her feet, brushing grass from her knees. As she stepped back, she caught sight of Eli, standing straight and tall, his small hand raised in a solemn salute to his father's grave and all the others surrounding it. His face held the same quiet determination she had seen in James so many times. Something stirred in Rachel's chest. Not the crushing weight of recent days, but something lighter, familiar. It was the same feeling she'd had in basic training, during tough missions, in the darkest moments, when giving up seemed easiest but never right. It was resolve, as steady and true as the markers standing in formation around her. Rachel stared at the bright yellow flyer taped to Mabel's diner's front window. Town Hall meeting. Today, 7 p.m. Addressing recent vandalism and community concerns. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed down her freshly pressed navy blouse. The morning sun cast long shadows through the empty diner, where she had arrived early to steady her nerves. "You look real nice, honey," Mabel said, emerging from the kitchen with a steaming mug of coffee. The older woman's weathered face creased with concern. "You sure you want to do this?" Rachel accepted the coffee gratefully, warming her hands around the ceramic mug. "I have to, Mabel. This town's splitting apart at the seams. Someone needs to speak up." Eli sat at his usual spot at the counter, homework spread out before him, but his pencil lay untouched. "Mom's gonna do great," he declared with unwavering faith. "She's not scared of anything." Rachel smiled at her son's confidence, even as butterflies danced in her stomach. If only he knew how her heart raced at the thought of standing before the whole town. Fighting overseas had been different. Clear objectives, training to fall back on. This was murkier territory. Throughout the day, Rachel rehearsed her speech between serving customers. She had written it out carefully the night before, then torn it up, starting over 3 times until the words felt right. Not too angry, not too weak. Finding that balance was like walking a tightrope. Pastor Grace stopped by during the lunch rush, her presence as steady as always. "Remember," she said, squeezing Rachel's hand, "speak from your heart. That's where truth lives." As evening approached, Rachel changed into fresh clothes in the diner's tiny bathroom. She studied her reflection in the spotted mirror, the faint lines around her eyes, the gray starting to thread through her dark hair. The woman looking back at her had seen worse than this, survived worse than this. "You've got this, soldier," she whispered to herself, squaring her shoulders. The community center was already half full when Rachel arrived with Eli. Folding chairs had been arranged in neat rows, facing a simple podium at the front. Mayor Thompson stood near the entrance, greeting people with practiced politicians' smiles. He nodded curtly to Rachel. He'd been notably absent during the whole controversy. "Mrs. Turner," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "I understand you'd like to address the gathering?" "Yes, sir," Rachel replied, matching his formality. "I believe I have something worth saying." She found seats near the front, helping Eli settle in with his tablet to keep him occupied. More townspeople filtered in, familiar faces from the diner, veterans who'd attended her meals, parents from Eli's school. Some offered encouraging smiles, others avoided her gaze entirely. The division was as clear as a line drawn in sand. Mr. Henry, her stalwart defender from that first confrontation, appeared at her elbow. "Packed house," he observed, taking the seat beside her. "Good. More people need to hear the truth. Rachel's hands felt clammy as she smoothed the folded paper containing her speech. The community center's ancient air conditioning wheezed overhead, barely cutting through the humid evening air. Whispered conversations created a low buzz of tension throughout the room. Mayor Thompson tapped the microphone, producing a sharp squeal of feedback. "If everyone could please take their seats," he began. "We're here tonight to address some concerning recent events." Rachel only half listened to his diplomatic opening remarks about community harmony and peaceful resolution. Her pulse quickened as she waited for her turn to speak. Eli's small hand found hers, squeezing tight. The mayor was just introducing the topic of the vandalism when movement at the back of the room caught Rachel's attention. The door opened quietly, and a familiar figure slipped in. Derek Cole stood uncertainly in the doorway, clean-shaven and wearing what looked like newly pressed clothes. Gone was his usual swagger, replaced by something almost resembling humility. His eyes met Rachel's for a brief moment before he quickly looked away, finding an empty chair in the last row. The room had gone notably quiet, heads turning to track Derek's entrance. He sat stiffly, hands clasped in his lap, looking nothing like the angry man who had terrorized the diner just days before. Rachel felt her carefully prepared speech crumpling in her tightening grip. Derek's presence changed everything, and nothing. The truth still needed to be spoken, perhaps now more than ever. Mayor Thompson was still talking, his words washing over the tense room. "And now, I believe Mrs. Turner would like to address the gathering." Rachel squeezed Eli's hand one last time and stood, her military training automatically straightening her spine. As she walked to the podium, she could feel Derek's presence behind her like a weight. She didn't turn to look at him again, but she knew he was there, watching, waiting, perhaps dreading what she might say. The microphone stood before her now, and all those familiar faces looked up expectantly. Some hostile, some supportive, all waiting to hear what the veteran-turned-waitress would say about the man who had tried to destroy her reputation and then vandalized her workplace in a drunken rage. The crumpled paper in her hands suddenly felt inadequate for what needed to be said. The community center's old wooden floors creaked under the weight of folding chairs filled with townspeople. Evening light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across concerned faces. The air felt thick with tension, whispered conversations creating a steady hum throughout the room. Rachel sat in the third row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Eli pressed close to her side, his small hand occasionally squeezing hers for reassurance. Pastor Grace sat on her other side, her weathered face serene despite the charged atmosphere. Mayor Thompson stood at the podium, his round face flushed as he addressed the crowd. "We're here tonight because recent events have shown us that we need to come together as a community. The vandalism at Mabel's Diner was just the latest incident that—" A chair scraped against the floor, cutting through the mayor's words. The room fell silent as Derek Cole rose slowly from his seat in the back row. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by something Rachel had never seen in him before: vulnerability. Derek's hands shook as he gripped the back of the chair in front of him. His face was pale, eyes rimmed with dark circles. The flashy leather jacket he usually wore was replaced by a simple button-down shirt, wrinkled but clean. "I need to say something," Derek said, his voice hoarse but clear enough to carry through the silent room. "About what I did. About everything." Mayor Thompson hesitated, then nodded. "Go ahead, Mr. Cole." Derek cleared his throat, his gaze fixed on the floor. "I've been cruel to Rachel Turner. I've spread lies about her. I vandalized the diner." Gasps and mutters rippled through the crowd, but Derek continued. "And I did it because I couldn't stand looking at someone who had the courage I never had." Rachel felt Eli's hand tighten around hers. She kept her face carefully neutral, though her heart hammered in her chest. "My little brother Jimmy," Derek's voice cracked. "He enlisted right after high school. He believed in serving something bigger than himself. I was the older brother. I should have gone with him, protected him. But I was scared." Tears began rolling down his weathered cheeks. "When he died in Afghanistan, I couldn't face it. So I turned that shame into anger." The room was absolutely still now, every person leaning forward, caught in the raw honesty of Derek's confession. Then Rachel comes along, he continued, finally lifting his eyes to meet hers across the room. A real hero. Someone who did what I couldn't. Who served with honor, saved lives, came home and kept right on serving others through that veterans program at the diner. He wiped roughly at his face. And instead of being inspired, I tried to tear her down, because every time I looked at her, I saw everything I failed to be. Pastor Grace reached over and squeezed Rachel's shoulder. Around the room, several people were dabbing at their eyes. The truth is, Derek's voice strengthened, Rachel showed me what real honor looks like. Not by fighting back when I was cruel, not by hating me when I deserved it, but by helping others, even while I was trying to hurt her. He straightened his shoulders. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I need everyone to know, Rachel Turner is everything I said she wasn't. She's brave, she's honorable, and this town is better because she's in it. The silence that followed felt electric. Rachel could feel every eye in the room turning to her. Slowly, deliberately, she stood up. Eli tried to hold onto her hand, but she gently freed herself and walked toward Derek. The crowd watched, barely breathing, as Rachel crossed the room. Her boots made soft sounds against the wooden floor, steady, measured steps that echoed her military bearing. When she reached Derek, she stopped, looking directly into his eyes. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice carrying in the silent room. "For telling the truth." "And Derek?" She paused, her expression softening. "I forgive you." Derek's face crumpled, and his shoulders began to shake. Without hesitation, Rachel reached out and placed a gentle hand on his arm. It wasn't an embrace, but a gesture of peace, of grace freely given. The room remained silent, the weight of the moment holding everyone still. In that suspended breath, something shifted in the air. Like a wound beginning to heal, like the first light of dawn breaking through darkness. Rachel stood near the back of the community center, her hands trembling slightly as she watched the scene unfold before her. After Derek's heartfelt confession, something in the room had shifted. The tension that had filled the space moments ago melted away like morning frost in sunshine. Mayor Thompson, a silver-haired man with kind eyes, cleared his throat and stepped forward. "Folks, I think we've all witnessed something powerful here tonight. But words alone aren't enough. Rachel Turner has shown us what real service looks like, not just overseas, but right here at home, with her veterans program at Mabel's Diner." Mabel herself stood up from her seat in the third row, her usual apron replaced with a neat blue dress. "I've watched Rachel work harder than anyone I know, serving others with a smile even when times were tough. That veterans center she's been dreaming about? That's exactly what this town needs." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Tom Jenkins, the hardware store owner, raised his hand. "I've got lumber and supplies I can donate. My boys and I will help with the construction too." Rachel's eyes widened as more hands shot up across the room. Mrs. Peterson, who taught at the elementary school, pledged to organize fundraising bake sales. The local garden club offered to landscape the grounds. Even gruff old Mr. Wilson, who rarely spoke at town meetings, stood up and announced he'd donate the empty building he owned on Oak Street, the perfect location for the center. "It's got good bones," Mr. Wilson said, his voice gruff but warm. "Just needs some fixing up, and I can't think of a better use for it than helping our veterans." Tears welled in Rachel's eyes as she watched her neighbors, one after another, step forward with offers of help. Some pledged money, others their time and skills. The town clerk started a sign-up sheet that quickly filled with names and phone numbers. Pastor Grace moved to stand beside Rachel, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You see, light always overcomes darkness. Your strength showed them the way." Derek, still standing near the podium, looked directly at Rachel. His face showed none of the anger that had haunted it for so long. "I want to help too," he said quietly. "I know about construction. I can work with Tom's crew." The room fell silent for a moment, then erupted in applause. Rachel felt Eli's small hand slip into hers, squeezing tight. She looked down at her son, seeing his face bright with joy and pride. Sarah Martinez, who owned the local coffee shop, started organizing committees right there on the spot. "We need groups for renovation, fundraising, programs, and outreach," she announced, taking charge with clipboard in hand. People clustered around her, eager to sign up. Mrs. Chen from the bank raised her hand. The bank can offer a matching fund for donations up to $10,000. More cheers filled the room. Rachel watched in amazement as her simple dream transformed into a community mission. The Veterans Center was no longer just her vision, it belonged to everyone now. She saw old rivalries set aside as people who hadn't spoken in years put their heads together, planning and organizing. The mayor had to raise his voice to be heard over the excited chatter. "I think we've found our path forward, folks. This is how we heal our town. By working together, by remembering what really matters." Eli tugged at Rachel's sleeve, his eyes shining. "Mom, they believe in you," he whispered, voice full of wonder. "Just like I do." Rachel pulled her son close, wrapping him in a tight hug. She couldn't speak past the lump in her throat, but her heart felt ready to burst with gratitude. Here, in this moment, she felt the truth of what she'd always told Eli. That light could shine through any darkness, that hope was stronger than fear, and that love could heal even the deepest wounds. As she held her son, Rachel caught glimpses of the future taking shape around her. Neighbors working side by side, veterans finding support and understanding, a community coming together to build something meaningful. But most precious of all was the feeling of Eli's arms around her waist, his faith in her as steady as a heartbeat. The evening sun slanted through the windows, painting everything in warm gold, as Rachel stood in the embrace of her son and the embrace of her community, overwhelmed by the power of forgiveness, redemption, and love. The early morning sun streamed through the dusty windows of what would soon become Hope Harbor Veterans Center. Rachel Turner stood in the doorway of the old brick building, clutching a set of keys and a clipboard. The smell of fresh paint and cleaning supplies filled the air as volunteers bustled around her, carrying supplies and chattering excitedly. "Mom, look what I found!" Eli's voice echoed from a corner. He held up an old photograph that had fallen behind a cabinet, a black and white snapshot of the building from decades ago when it had been a general store. Rachel smiled, walking over to ruffle his hair. "That's going right on our memory wall, sweetie. Why don't you put it somewhere safe for now?" The sound of work boots on wooden floors made her turn. Derek Cole walked in carrying 2 5-gallon paint buckets, his face already showing streaks of sweat from the morning's labor. He nodded at Rachel, his expression carrying the quiet respect that had replaced his former hostility. "Got the light blue you wanted for the counseling room," he said, setting down the buckets. "And some volunteers from the hardware store are bringing more supplies later." "Thank you, Derek." Rachel's voice was warm but measured, still adjusting to their new dynamic. "Could you help Mrs. Martinez with the windows? They need a good scrubbing before we can paint the frames." He nodded, heading toward the elderly volunteer who was already attacking the windows with determination. Rachel watched as Derek carefully showed Mrs. Saint Martinez a better way to reach the higher panes, his movements gentle and patient. Throughout the morning, more townspeople arrived with donations, chairs, desks, filing cabinets, and even a new coffee maker. Pastor Grace supervised the arrangement of the furniture, her commanding presence ensuring everything found its proper place. "This room here," Rachel explained to a group of volunteers, pointing to a sunny corner space, "will be our art therapy area. Eli's already designed some beautiful murals for the walls." Her son beamed with pride, showing his sketchbook to anyone who would look. The pages were filled with drawings of eagles, flags, and service members helping one another, symbols of strength and unity that would soon cover the walls. By afternoon, the main room was transformed. Fresh paint brightened the walls, and clean windows allowed sunlight to pour in. Volunteers had arranged comfortable chairs in a circle for support group meetings, while others organized a small library of resources in the corner. During their lunch break, everyone gathered in what would become the center's kitchen. Rachel had brought sandwiches, and others contributed cookies, fruit, and drinks. The atmosphere was light, filled with conversation and laughter, a far cry from the tension that had divided the town just weeks before. Derek sat quietly at the end of the table, eating his sandwich and listening to the conversations around him. When Eli approached with his sketchbook, showing Derek a new drawing of soldiers helping wounded comrades, the man's eyes softened. "Your mom did something like that," Derek said softly to Eli. "Saved 3 of her teammates under heavy fire. That's real courage right there." Rachel, overhearing, felt her chest tighten with emotion. She busied herself with wiping down counters, but kept glancing at Derek and Eli as they discussed the drawing. The sight of her former tormentor gently encouraging her son's artistic talents struck her deeply. After lunch, the work continued with renewed energy. Derek organized a team to assemble storage shelves, while Rachel and Pastor Grace arranged the intake office. Eli and several other children worked on painting positive messages on river rocks for the garden outside. "Remember when you first proposed this idea?" Pastor Grace asked Rachel as they sorted through donation forms. "Look how far we've come," Rachel nodded, watching the bustling activity around her. Every person there represented a change in the community, a shift from division to unity, from judgment to understanding. As the afternoon wore on, the kitchen became the heart of activity. Volunteers took turns preparing coffee and snacks, washing dishes, and sharing stories. Derek found himself at the sink, methodically washing plates and cups as others brought them in. Rachel noticed how he seemed different there. His shoulders relaxed, his movements calm and purposeful. Gone was the angry man who had once stood outside the diner hurling insults. In his place was someone who had found peace in simple service. The other volunteers treated him normally now, passing him dirty dishes with casual thanks, including him in their conversations about weekend plans and local news. Derek responded quietly, but genuinely, no longer carrying the weight of his bitter facade. As the day began winding down, Rachel watched Derek continue his self-appointed task at the sink. He smiled faintly as he worked, and she recognized in his expression something she understood well: the quiet gratitude of someone who had finally found where they belonged. The scene reminded her of something her late husband once said about healing. Sometimes the biggest changes happen in the smallest moments, in the simple act of showing up and doing what needs to be done. Looking at Derek now, peacefully washing dishes after a day of helping others, she knew exactly what that meant. The Veterans Center wasn't just about providing services. It was about creating a space where people could find purpose, where past wounds could heal through present actions. Derek's transformation from bitter antagonist to humble volunteer embodied everything Rachel had hoped to achieve. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the freshly cleaned windows, the day's work drew to a close. Volunteers gathered their belongings, making plans to return tomorrow for more painting and organizing. The building was already taking shape, becoming something more than just a renovation project. It was becoming a symbol of the town's renewal. Derek remained at the sink, finishing the last few dishes, his movements unhurried and content. The faint smile never left his face as he worked, no longer the mask of bitterness he had worn for so long, but simply the expression of someone who had found their place in the world. The autumn breeze rustled the red, white, and blue banners hanging from the newly painted facade of Hope Harbor Veterans Center. Rachel Turner smoothed her navy blazer, her hands trembling slightly as she watched the growing crowd gather on the freshly swept sidewalk. The morning sun caught the brass lettering above the entrance, making it gleam like a beacon of promise. Eli, dressed in his Sunday best, bounced on his toes beside her. He clutched a large pair of ceremonial scissors, carefully wrapped in patriotic ribbon. "This is so cool, Mom," he whispered, his eyes wide with excitement. "Look how many people came." Indeed, it seemed the whole town had turned out. Rows of folding chairs filled the blocked-off street, with veterans sitting proudly in the front row, their service caps and medals displayed with dignity. Mabel from the diner had set up a refreshment table laden with cookies and lemonade. Even Mr. Henry, who'd first revealed Rachel's military service, sat beaming in his wheelchair. Pastor Grace stood near the podium, her silver hair catching the sunlight, Bible held close to her heart. She wore her finest dress, the purple fabric rippling in the breeze. Her presence brought a sense of peace to Rachel's nervous heart. Derek Cole stood quietly at the back of the crowd, wearing clean work clothes and a humble expression. He'd spent the previous evening helping set up chairs, working steadily, and speaking little. The change in him was evident to everyone who remembered his former bitter self. "5 minutes, Mrs. Turner," called one of the organizers, checking her watch. Rachel nodded, taking a deep breath. She felt Eli's small hand slip into hers and squeeze. "You've got this, Mom," he said with complete conviction. The town mayor stepped forward first, welcoming everyone and speaking about community spirit. Rachel barely heard the words, lost in the surreal feeling of seeing her dream become reality. The old brick building had been transformed through weeks of hard work, scrubbing, painting, repairing, and furnishing. Local businesses had donated supplies, veterans had offered expertise, and countless volunteers had given their time. Pastor Grace approached the microphone next, her rich voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "Let us pray," she began, lifting her hands. "Lord, we gather today to dedicate this place of healing and hope. We thank you for bringing light from darkness, unity from division, and purpose from pain. Bless this center and all who enter seeking help or offering service. And we especially thank you for Rachel Turner, whose courage showed us that one person's faith can move mountains." "Amen," the crowd responded in unison. A group of veterans in uniform stepped forward, raising their hands in a crisp salute as the flag was raised on the new pole outside the center. The stars and stripes caught the breeze and unfurled proudly against the blue sky. Rachel returned their salute, muscle memory, making the gesture sharp and precise despite her emotion. "Mom," Eli whispered, tugging her sleeve. "It's time for the ribbon." Rachel walked with her son to the wide red ribbon stretched across the entrance. The ceremonial scissors felt heavy in their shared grip. Cameras clicked and whirred as they positioned themselves. "Together?" Rachel asked softly. "Together," Eli confirmed with a grin. They cut through the ribbon in one clean stroke. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Eli's face shone with pure joy as he held up his half of the ribbon triumphantly. Rachel stepped to the podium, her heart pounding. The notes for her speech felt unnecessary now. She knew exactly what needed to be said. Looking out at the faces before her, she saw not just a crowd, but a community that had learned to heal together. "A few months ago," she began, her voice clear and steady, "someone told me I was nothing special. Just a waitress, just a single mom, just someone struggling to get by." She paused, meeting Derek's eyes briefly. He nodded slightly, acknowledging the past with quiet remorse. "Those words hurt," Rachel continued, "but they also sparked something unexpected. They reminded me that we all have moments when we feel small, invisible, or broken. And they showed me that sometimes our deepest wounds can become our greatest purpose." She gestured to the building behind her. "This center isn't just about veterans, though we will always honor their service. It's about remembering that every person has value, that every story matters, and that it's never too late to begin again. They said I was nothing special. But special is found in service, compassion, and grace." The crowd rose to their feet, applauding with genuine emotion. Eli rushed to hug her, nearly knocking the microphone over in his enthusiasm. Pastor Grace dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, while Derek stood quietly clapping, peace finally visible on his face. Veterans lined up to shake Rachel's hand, some with tears in their eyes, others with grateful smiles. Each one understood what this place could mean for others like them. A sanctuary where military service was honored and healing was possible. The doors of Hope Harbor Veterans Center stood open wide, welcoming all who needed a fresh start. Above them, the morning sun continued to make the brass letters shine, a promise of light in the darkness, of hope restored, and of grace that could transform any heart. The setting sun painted the sky in deep purples and oranges, as Rachel and Eli walked down Main Street, their footsteps echoing on the familiar sidewalk. The day's excitement still buzzed in Rachel's chest, the speeches, the handshakes, the proud salutes from fellow veterans. But now, in the quiet of evening, everything felt softer, more peaceful. "Mom, look at all the stars coming out," Eli said, pointing upward with the same enthusiasm he'd shown while cutting the ribbon earlier. His other hand held tight to the piece of cake they'd saved, wrapped carefully in a napkin. Rachel squeezed his shoulder. "Beautiful night for a beautiful day, isn't it?" They passed Mabel's diner, its windows dark now, but still displaying the handmade congratulations signs the regulars had made. Rachel remembered those first difficult days behind that counter, the whispers and doubts that had nearly broken her spirit. Now, those same customers had stood beside her at the opening ceremony, their faces beaming with pride. As they approached the Veterans Center, the porch light cast a warm glow across the entrance. Derek stood there, finishing up his evening tasks, looking different than the angry man who had once mocked her outside the diner. His shoulders were relaxed, his expression peaceful as he swept the steps one final time. "Evening, Rachel." "Eli." Derek's voice was gentle, almost shy. He leaned on the broom, looking up at the stars himself. "Some turnout today, huh?" "Sure was," Rachel replied, noting how naturally the friendly exchange felt now. "Thanks for all your help with the setup." Derek shook his head, humble. "Least I could do." He glanced at the flag hanging above, moving softly in the evening breeze. "Your speech today, about what makes someone special," it hit home. Eli piped up, "Mom's always special, even when some people couldn't see it." Derek's face flushed slightly, but he nodded. "You're right about that, buddy. Your mom taught me what real courage looks like." He gave a small wave and turned back to his work, the gesture full of quiet respect. As they continued their walk home, Rachel noticed how Eli walked a little taller, his chin up, just like when he'd helped cut the ribbon. The streetlights flickered on one by one, creating pools of light that guided their way. A few neighbors called out, "Congratulations," from their porches, their voices warm in the growing dark. "Mom?" Eli asked as they turned onto their street. "Remember when you used to say that bad times don't last forever?" Rachel smiled, thinking of all the nights she'd whispered those words to him, trying to believe them herself. "I do. You were right." He squeezed her hand. "Look at everything now. Even Mr. Cole changed." Their house came into view, the porch light welcoming them home. Rachel thought about Pastor Grace's words about redemption, about how grace could soften the hardest hearts. The elderly preacher had been there today, too, her prayers blessing the center with hope and healing. Inside, Rachel helped Eli get ready for bed, watching as he carefully placed his piece of the ribbon from the ceremony on his bedside table, right next to his sketchbook full of soldier drawings. His room was warm with the glow of his star-shaped nightlight, casting familiar shadows on the walls. "Time for sleep, soldier," Rachel said, using their old nickname as she pulled his covers up. Eli yawned, but kept talking, excited. "Today was the best day ever. Did you see how many people came?" And when all the veterans saluted, his voice grew sleepy. "We did it, Mom. We really did it." Rachel sat on the edge of his bed, running her hand through his hair. "We sure did, baby. With a lot of help from good people." "Like Mr. Cole?" Eli's eyes were heavy now. "He's not mean anymore. He just needed someone to show him how to be brave, like you did." Rachel leaned down and kissed his forehead, her heart full. Sometimes people just need a second chance to find their way. Now close those eyes. She waited until his breathing became steady and deep before standing up. At his window, she paused to adjust the curtains, catching sight of the Veterans Center in the distance. The flag there moved gently in the night breeze, its stars and stripes a reminder of everything they'd fought for, not just overseas, but right here at home. Looking at her sleeping son, then back at the flag in the distance, Rachel felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. "We're stronger than yesterday," she whispered to herself, the truth of it resonating in her chest. The window latch clicked softly as she closed it, leaving Eli to dream of ribbons and flags and heroes who looked just like his mom. Outside, the Veterans Center stood as a testament to healing, its flag still waving in the gentle night breeze, a symbol of hope for everyone who needed to find their way home. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Rachel Turner, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.